The man held out his hand in front of him and started shouting that this porter was excluded from the party called Swords of Darkness. The surrounding people looked at She accusingly. He was sitting on a chair. He put his hands on his legs and bent over. Sei didn't answer. His head was down, and he was remembering the stranger's words about whether he wanted to start a new life. The next moment, one of the bows with an inverted helmet on his face opened his mouth in surprise. Something was flying in his direction. The bandit's helmet turned over from Sei's blow. He began running around the room and shouting that he could not see anything. He took a fighting pose. One of the armed bandits was behind him. He was floating in the air. A bandit with a hood on his head opened his mouth and dried his tongue. He was armed with a knife and intended to attack Shea from behind. Sei noticed the bandit, and the next moment an iron chain began to appear in Sei's hands. A hooded bandit with a knife in his hands makes an attack on Sei, but he manages to dodge. Having missed, the bandit was greatly surprised. It is necessary to closely monitor the actions of the bandit. A long iron target appeared around them. This one grabs a hooded bandit with an iron chain. Sei slips across the floor, and with a jerk, the bandit is behind Sei. Another bandit turns out to be in front of Sei, who sent a broken arm in his direction, which caught him. Sei grabs the head of the dark-haired bandit, who ends up on the floor, and Sei ends up in the air, fearing about the bandit's head. Then the iron chain appears in Sei's hands again. Sei turns out to be away from the bandits, who began to rise. The bandits got to their feet. A shadow formed over them, which scared them a lot. The bandits looked at each other and looked up. A large stone statue loomed over them, which was shrouded in an iron target. One of the bandits, who was wearing a raincoat with a hood, had an iron chain tied around his arm. Beads of sweat appeared on the bandit's face. He looked at his hand in surprise. A large statue tied with a chain fell to the floor and pulled one of the bandits, who was wearing a cape with a hood. He landed on the floor. He was looking back and leaning his hand on his leg. The next moment, a bald man turns out to be behind Sei, who began to swing at him. He felt the man behind him. The bald man struck at Sei, but Sei manages to put a wooden shield in front of him. A weapon crashed into him. A dark-haired young man was looking up. He was shielding his face from the bright light with his hand. Feathers were falling on him from above. The young man was sitting on the floor. He pulled up his hand, which was touched by a woman's hand with bracelets. The bald man held the weapon in his hands and watched as Sei started to be thrown aside from his attack. Sei's shield shattered into pieces. Then, Sei was thrown into the statue, which began to crack from the impact. Clouds of dust rose into the air. He was flying upside down. He closed one eye and joined his hands together. As soon as he approached the wall, there was a large mattress between him and the wall. Then, instead of a stone wall, he crashed into a mattress that appeared with the help of his magic. This one ended up on the floor. He began to rise. A bald man with a hammer in his hands was walking towards where this one was. He said that the man did not come alive from using such skills, but their physical strength is very different. The bald man looked at Sei. Then he smiled and said that the room looked cleaner than usual. It was because Sei had used the storage skill before fighting them. There were clouds of dust behind the man. He was squatting, leaning on the floor with one hand and wiping his face with the other. There was a mattress behind her. The bald man stopped and said that he still needed to look for such a strong porter, but this one was still too weak. The bald man began to smile maliciously. Veins began to appear on his body, and a table with the profession of war of the 30th level appeared next to him. The man said that he would now see the difference between them. The next moment, Sei holds his hand out in front of him, and a large stone brick appears in front of him. The head of the bald man who was advancing on Sei turns out to be a few meters away from Sei. Sei jumps to the side. At this time, a stone brick is broken by the attack of a bald man. Fragments of brick are in the air. The bald man heads towards Sei. This one warily watches the actions of the bald man. The dust from the broken brick dissipates. The bald man is very surprised when he sees several bags with the inscription, "Flour," in front of him. A bald man makes an attack and smashes sacks of flour with his hammer. Flour dust rises in the air. In front of the dark-haired guy stood a man who had long blonde hair. He spread his arms to the side and smiled. The blonde guy offered the dark-haired man a choice of 2 processions. The bald man clenched his teeth and began to look around. He said that such childish games would not work with him. or maybe he intended to escape from him. Several more sacks of flour flew towards the man. The bald man continued to swing his hammer and smash the bags of flour. Dust continued to appear in the air. He replied to the man that he was wrong. He did everything so that the man would be in this place. The bald man began to get even more angry. Veins began to grow on his face. The man knocked on the wall. Cracks appeared on it. Sei said that the bandit's lair is a former warehouse, which is built of non-flammable materials for storing things. The windows of the warehouse were boarded up. Sei went on to say that he had slightly improved this warehouse to reduce air circulation in it. Sei was standing behind one of the boards. He raised his hand, in which a fire was burning. He then directed the flame into a small hole in the room, which was shrouded in flour dust. Sei said he was wondering what would happen if he used fire in this room. The bald man started shouting that he was talking nonsense. He was standing behind a large statue that looked like a chicken. This one kept his hand in his pocket and took the other one aside. There was a big explosion behind Sei. He started walking forward. Then he said that the man would have to die without understanding what Sei was talking about. He headed towards the girl. She was sitting on the floor with her mouth wide open in surprise. Smoke began to appear in the room where the guys were. He held out his hand to the girl and asked if she was all right. The girl gave him her hand and replied that she was fine. Sei activated his ability and tables with characteristics appeared next to the girl. She was a nun. He was surprised to see a table with the girl's name. Her name was Runamilia Taltold. He put a hood over his head and said that the girl should not trust unfamiliar people. A table with different characteristics appeared in front of the guy and the man. The dark-haired guy pointed his finger at the profession of a porter instead of a hero. Sei put his hand in his pocket. With the second, he began to wave to the girl and move further away from her. Then he said goodbye to the girl. The girl held her suitcase in her hands and shouted that he should wait for her. There was more and more smoke in the room. He turned up at the door and opened it a crack. Then he said that the onlookers had come to see if the girl should leave this place as soon as possible. People began to appear on the street. The door creaked and he disappeared. The girl stood still. She made a surprised expression on her face and raised her hand. Night fell. Lights began to turn on in the windows of the multi-story building. A girl in a translucent outfit with an ornament on her head was dancing. Sei and the other men were sitting on wooden tables with mugs and plates on them. The girl in the semi-transparent outfit turned her back on Sei. He began to examine her fifth point. He was holding a wooden mug with a drink in his hands and thought about something for a while. Sei put a wooden mug with a foaming drink on the table and thought that the girl he saved had a last name. She definitely had to be from an aristocratic family. He imagined the rescued girl smiling at him and touching her body. He thought that the girl was too trusting. Her parents probably raised her in love and care. He picked up a mug with a drink and started drinking it. Then he thought that he didn't know yet whose environment she was in, so he'd better stay away from her. He held the mug in his hands, not far from his face, and listened to the girl he had saved and the man with the mustache talking behind his back. The girl told the man that she was on a monastic mission and could heal any wound for free. He got up and approached a girl named Runamilia and said that maybe something had happened to her. Runamilia looked back. Her face was red. She said that this was really the guy who saved her. The next moment, the girl was holding a baby in her arms who was wrapped in a diaper. He was asleep. The girl was unscrewed by various people who happily looked at her and the child. The mustachioed man looked at Runamilia and said that the girl wanted to get a free room. In the time of his grandfather, a monastic mission was a frequent occurrence, but he had not heard of such a thing for a long time. Runamilia confirmed the words of the man with the mustache. The man with the mustache said that he did not want the church to hold a grudge against him. He could offer to spend the night with a girl in a room for 6 people. Runamilia replied that she was grateful to the man. He introduced strange men. Then, a picture appeared in Sei's head of Runamilia, sleeping in her night pajamas. Her hair was disheveled, and there were several men around Runamilia who touched her on different parts of her body. Sei put a coin with the image of a woman on the bar. Then he looked at the mustachioed man and said that he would pay for a room for one person, for a girl. Runamilia was surprised. The man thanked Sei for his assistance. He started to walk away from the bar. Runamilia looked at Sei and thanked him. He turned around and said that there was nothing to thank him for. He looked away and said that the priest had saved his life once, so Runamilia could thank him. That's how he could repay a little debt. He kept one hand in his pocket and he raised it to his friend to say goodbye. Runamelia stood next to him and asked him to stop. Runamelia, with a rosy face, said that her name is Runamelia Taltolt, and she is a nun in the Holy Church. She wants to thank Sei for saving her. He looked at the girl and introduced himself. Sei turned away and began to move away from Runamelia. She bowed to him in turn. He sat down at his seat and continued to drink a drink from a wooden mug. Runamelia was standing at the counter next to a mustachioed man. The mustachioed man was wiping the mug with a towel. Then he shouted that the girl really wanted to eat for free. Maybe she already needed to stop begging. Runamelia said she was on a monastic mission. Then the events moved to the buffet. A girl in a beautiful dress held a glass in her hands and looked at the elegant guests. There was a flower decoration on her head. The room where the girl was with the guests was illuminated by a large chandelier. Two strange men appeared in the establishment. Their faces were red, and drool began to flow from their mouths as soon as they noticed Runamelia. The men went to Runamelia and began to say that she could pour them, and in return they would feed her. They were also ready to help Runamelia with the rest. She began thanking the men for their generosity. He heard a conversation between a girl and men. Sei slammed his wooden mug with a drink on the table. He found himself behind the bar where Runamelia and men she didn't know were sitting. Runamelia looked at Sei's back in surprise. Sei looked at Runamelia and with a slightly angry but smiling face said that maybe Runamelia wanted to eat with him. He was holding a mug with a drink in his hand. His hood with fur was pulled down over his shoulders. Runamelia joined her hands together. A blush appeared on her face, and she jumped that she was ready, with pleasure, to join Sei. Runamelia was sitting on one of the upholstered chairs at the bar. The girl in the translucent outfit continued to dance and smile at the surrounding guests of this institution. There were various ornaments on her head and arms. There were a lot of people in the place, and the guys had plates with various food and snacks on the table. Runamelia asked Sei that maybe he was doing some kind of task right now. Sei was holding a wooden mug in his hands. He looked at Runamelia calmly and said that he was not on a mission right now, but he was heading to Lotos, in Linkula. The guys were sitting at the bar. Runamelia said that it was really a coincidence. She also needed to get into the Lotus. Sei replied that he understood her. Mustachioed men were sitting not far from the guys and eating. Runamelia introduced the city, and with a smile on her face said that she was on a monastic mission. She wanted to gather a party and come to the labyrinth in the Lotus. Maybe she was heading to the city for the same. Sei closed his eyes and agreed with Runamelia. Then a young blonde guy appeared. He was wearing a suit with a rose on his chest. There were a lot of girls around the guy. Their faces were red with embarrassment. The guy was smiling broadly in response. He raised his mug and said that in the city they were heading to, there was just a job for a porter. Runamelia held the cutlery in her hands. Her mouth was full of food. Then she looked at Sei and supported him. There were crumbs of food on Runamelia's red face. She looked at the plate of food with vegetables and a piece of meat on it and asked for forgiveness. Runamelia put her hands in her fists and said that most likely heaven was giving her a chance. It would be better on the way with a fellow traveler. Sei was holding a mug with a drink in his hands and looking towards Runamelia. Runamelia raised her hands and looked towards Sei. Then she hopefully said that if Sei didn't mind, then they could go on together. Sei looked at Runamelia in surprise. She did not take her gaze away from Sei. Sei thought for a while. He held a wooden mug in his hands and looked in front of him. Sei's hair was a little disheveled. Then he lifted the mug and, with his eyes closed, said that if Runamelia could stand it, he is ready to agree to her proposal. After hearing these words, Runamelia began to smile and shine happily. Sei pointed his finger at Runamelia and said that he was a commoner, and Runamelia could not address him officially. Runamelia timidly replied that she owed a lot to Seiya, and in the future she would have to rely on him a lot. Shi's expression changed. He frowned a little and replied that apparently Runamelia was really serious. At these words, Runamelia closed her eyes and began to smile sweetly at her. After thinking for a while, he began to smile back at her. The guys were sitting at the bar. Runamelia was looking at Sei attentively and listening to everything he was saying to her. Sei raised his hand and said something to Runamelia. A table with characteristics appeared, and someone pressed the button with the profession of a porter. A strange glowing circle appeared above the blonde head. Runamelia touched Sei's shoulder. He put his hand to his chin, and with the other hand thoughtfully pointed at something. Then he raised his hands and looked at Runamelia. She, in turn, covered her mouth with her hand and laughed. Runamelia picked up her suitcase and headed towards the exit of the establishment. There was a lamp with a candle hanging by the door. Sei waved his hand to Runamelia as a farewell. She smiled back at him. The night sky hung over the city, on which the stars and the moon shone brightly. The wooden door in one of the rooms of the city was closed, and there was a wooden basin on the table, and a clean towel lay next to it. Drops of water were running down Sei's face. He exhaled heavily. He was shirtless and only trousers. He raised his hand and magical clumps of water and fire appeared in it. The heated water on the fire gradually poured into a wooden basin. Sei began to wipe his body with a wet cloth while he thought that during the water treatments he was practicing magic and his storage skill. Sei had a fire in his hand, and a water blob was warming over the fire. Sei began to squeeze water out of the cloth he was using to wipe his body. Sei was standing in front of a table with a wooden basin of water on it, and behind Sei was a made-up bed. Sei snapped his fingers and the clothes completely disappeared from his body. He looked at the basin of water and reflected that even when he was resting, he continues to train. This is the way of survival of a weak profession. He started breathing heavily and said he couldn't do it anymore. Sei hugged his body and began to reflect that he was very aroused. He was using a self-healing skill. His seed came out and immediately recovered. He breathed heavily and remembered the curves of Runamelia's body and her sweet smile. He thought that a night without a woman was really hell. A man in a business suit was armed with a sword. He menacingly said that he needed to be buried in secret before anyone found out that someone in the Amberius family was born with such a low profession. There was a knock on the door that led to Sei's room. He opened his eyes and stared at the door. Then Sei, completely naked, walked up to her and pulled on the handle. Standing in the doorway was a girl who used to dance at the place where Sei and Runamelia had dinner. The girl smiled and said that her name was Mania, and she was a dancer. The girl approached Sei and hugged him. Then she said that it was really beautiful in a luxury room. It was probably boring to sleep alone in such a room. She saw how Sei looked at her in the establishment. The girl snuggled up to Sei and said that she and Sei could really have a good night together. The girl looked at the porter's pendant, which was hanging around her neck, in surprise. The girl hugged Sei's hand and said that he was really a porter, but she thought that this hero, since he paid for that nun, the girl would like to get pregnant from Sei. Sei looked warily at the girl, who began to take off her clothes. The girl smiled and said that the profession is inherited, and she does not want them to inherit it. Sei did not take his wary gaze away from the girl. After a while, the girl was lying on the bed. Her arms were thrown back, and she was moaning with pleasure. He touched the girl on different parts of her body. The girl screamed that she was experiencing such pleasant sensations for the first time in her life. Sei and the girl were on the bed. The girl was on her knees. Sei was behind her. His hands were on the girl's hips. The girl pulled out her tongue and screamed with pleasure. Then there was a splash of white liquid. He was holding the girl up. They were on the bed. Then there was another splash of liquid, and he released the girl from his embrace. The girl fell on the bed and screamed that she was going crazy and couldn't do it anymore. He closed his eyes and put his hands behind his head. Then he smiled and said that really the girl was already giving up. He only realized where she was pleased. From that moment on, he intends to put even more pressure on them. The man with the circle on his head started laughing. Then he said that for the first time in his life, someone was the only guy who chose the profession of a porter. The scared guy was looking at the blade of the blade. The man stopped smiling. He put his hands on the girl's hips. She looked at him with her tongue hanging out and said that he had to stop. He replied that it was too early to go to bed. Then he took the girl in his arms again. He touched her whole body. The girl continued to scream with pleasure, and the guy was behind her and smiling. Morning followed the night. The sun began to rise gradually and illuminate the roofs of city houses. There was a lot of strange liquid on the bed. He was standing naked by the big window. The schools on horseback were blowing in the morning wind. The sutra was quiet, but he began to shout loudly that the morning was really wonderful. The girl was lying on the bed with her mouth open. He said that the girl should also look at this beautiful view. He was standing by the open window. He was completely naked. Sei smiled and said that he would like to repeat the events of the night one more time before going on. There were no clouds in the sky. Lush tree crowns grew in the city and beyond, and the city itself was surrounded by hills. Runamelia raised her fist. Her face was red, and she was looking ahead with an enthusiastic gaze. Sei stood behind Runamelia and looked at her with a smile. The wheels of the cart moved, and the guys drove off. Sei and Runamelia were sitting in a carriage with several people. One of the fellow travelers was sleeping. The other was reading. The guys discussed how they could get to their destination faster and better. The cart was traveling along a small path that was located in a field. Ahead of the wagon was a dense spruce forest and high mountains. Runamelia put her hands on the edge of the cart and looked at Sei with a smile on her face. Then she said that she was grateful to him, since he had paid for the ride. Sei looked in front of him and thought that he had foreseen this. Being a porter, he was just a burden on the front line of fire. A man with long hair that covered his face began to grin viciously and say that he was making the guy luck in his reincarnation. Morning came. The sun was high in the sky. Its rays fell on the awakened city. Sei looked suspiciously at Runamelia and said that she had a plan to travel for free with fellow travelers. He was generally surprised that nothing had happened to Runamelia so far. Run family said that Sei was right. Shi's expression changed as he shifted his gaze from the girl to the window. He looked at him in surprise and delight. Sei had a view of the city, which was surrounded by high stone walls, and the walls themselves were surrounded by a dense and dark forest. Runamelia held on to the edge of the wagon. She looked at Sei, who began to take off his hood from his head. He lowered his hood and smiled casually. Runamelia looked at Sei. She was a little surprised, and her face turned even redder from embarrassment. The guys found themselves at a large wooden house, next to which there were many people and other horse-drawn carts. Runamelia said that this one no longer hides his face. He replied that he did so because he did not want to be recognized. Runamelia asked in surprise what could he have done to someone badly. Sei put his hands in the pocket of his jacket and said that he would like to ask Runamelia some question. He looked at Runamelia casually and said that she should tell him about her monastic mission, which she constantly talks about. Runamelia smiled and began to tell that this mission is for those whom God has endowed with the profession of a monk. They travel the world, simultaneously healing the sick and exterminating monsters and others. Runamelia joined her hands together and looked up. She imagined a girl in a headdress with a weapon in her hands. Runamelia said that her goal is to raise the level and retrain from a monk to a priest. The girl with the cat ears woke up. She covered herself with a blanket and stood up. The room was empty, and the girl began to look around. Sei and Runamelia were sitting on the veranda at a wooden table with a tray of food on it. Runamelia said that under God's protection, she and her fellow travelers are looking for adventures while helping each other. Runamelia joined her hands together and closed her eyes. Then she said that everything was just like in the story of the holy woman on a monastic mission. He was eating a sandwich and asked me to tell him about it in more detail. Runamelia continued the story that this is a biography that she has read many times. Runamelia presented a map with fields, forests, lakes, and mountains. Runamelia went on to say that she traveled all over the world healing the needy, fighting monsters. So she traveled all over the world. Sei and Runamelia stood and looked at the beautiful view that opened from the veranda. The guys discussed that others raised their levels in different ways. The guys looked at the mountains and the lush crowns of the trees, and Runamelia continued to say that her family was not very rich. They could not hire an escort when moving. Runamelia looked in front of her and said that she, like that saint from the book, wanted to gather a group and go to the dungeon, because she must also have some kind of goal. Sei leaned on the railing and stared intently at Runamelia. Then he looked away and said that he was just a porter. Then he laughed and said that he did not want his life to be limited by any limits. Heroes and brave men, they're all strong, but they live under pressure from the expectations of other people and the responsibility that is imposed on them. Runamelia was surprised. The guys had a view of the mountains. He put his hand in front of him and said that the world was big, and it was unthinkable for him to live in it. Being not free, he wanted to be strong, not necessarily the strongest. The cat-eared and tailed girl's gaze fell on the bedside table, on which stood 2 glasses, a jug, and writing materials. There was also a note on the table, and when she saw it, the girl said this name. He raised his hand above himself and clenched it into a fist. Then he smiled and said that he wanted to live the way he wanted and travel the world. The guys were walking along the streets of the city. which were full of people. Runamilia walked in front and smiled stupidly. Sei walked behind her and also smiled slightly. Then the guys found themselves at the reservoir. Runamilia took off her shoes and climbed ankle-deep into the water. There were fish swimming next to her feet. She watched it enthusiastically. Sei went to Runamilia and stood next to her in the water. Runamilia slipped and started falling back into the water. There were people standing by the shore of the reservoir. Runamilia was wet. Sei took her by the hands and lifted her up. Runamilia leaned against Sei's body and began to smile sheepishly. Runamilia was all wet. She pressed her chest against Sei's body. From this, Sei was shocked. Sei began to look gloomily at Runamilia. The sun began to set behind the mountains. The sky gradually began to darken. Birds began to fly over the roofs of city houses. Sei and Runamilia said goodbye. As soon as she and Runamilia separated, Sei began to strangely hug his body. Sei's whole face was covered in drops of sweat. His expression was gloomy. He was walking down the street and noticed silhouettes of women in one of the alleys. He looked at the girls, who were standing in the alley. They were provocatively dressed. Their faces were red. Then one of them began to undress. He looked at these girls suspiciously and thoughtfully. The three girls were naked. Their faces were red, and tongues were sticking out of their mouths. The girls were lying on the bed. One of them was on her knees, and a guy was getting used to her from behind. The girl made a strange expression on her face. At this time, he was smiling maliciously. A blonde guy named Sei put on a jacket. His ear was pierced and his hair was hanging down over his face. He thought that he was apologizing to Nyanya as he was going on a trip. The next morning came. The sun rose high and illuminated the roofs of houses and the lush crowns of trees that grew in the city. Runamilia went outside. Her cheeks were red. She was looking away and smiling broadly. He walked up to her and started waving his hand in greeting. The guys got into the cart and drove to the next matting along a wide country road. On the horizon, in front of the cart, a city began to be seen, and behind it were high mountains. The guys came to a city whose houses were built next to each other. Various people were walking along the narrow and winding streets of the city. The city was built on a hilly area, so there were a lot of stairs. Along one of the streets of the city, there were shops with various household items. Unusually dressed people walked along this street. They also had an interesting appearance. Sei was holding a sandwich in his hands, then he took a bite and looked away. Seiwei began to say that they would be in Lotus City soon. Runamilia stretched out her hands to take her sandwich. Then she looked at Sei and asked if he had been in a lotus before. He closed his eyes and said that he had not been there before, but he could tell by the atmosphere. He recalled various people who were dressed in interesting outfits and armor. The men looked very formidable. Sei said that these men look like adventurers, but they are afraid of each other. She was holding a sandwich in her hands. His other hand was in his pocket. Then he looked away and said that these men are 100% adventurers who want to raise their rating to bronze. Runamilia timidly watched and listened to her. The guys began to approach their cart, and Runamilia said that this one was really attentive. Sei replied that his observation skill was really necessary for survival. The young man found himself in a room with various things. So there were weapons, bags of various sizes, clothes. Sei thought that he was going on a journey to become a man who would be worthy of her. Sei started climbing into the cart and continued to say that strong adventurers are distinguished by their aura. He can tell that right away. He sat down in a seat in the carriage. Then he closed his eyes and said that even a commoner could notice it. Then he opened his eyes slightly and looked away. He was a little surprised when he saw a girl in an unusual outfit next to him. There were two more girls in the cart. They were adventurers. The blonde girl was wearing a short suit. A cape was coming off her shoulders a little. The second girl was dark-haired. She put her hand to her face and covered one eye. Sei was sitting. Then he crossed his legs and folded his arms together on his chest. Then he said that what was happening around was pretty good. Runamilia looked at Sei and asked him if those people could be stronger than adventurers. The blonde girl was wearing a short suit with long stockings sticking out from under it. She crossed her legs. The girl was sitting in the cart when she joined. A bell from the sleeves of her blouse was tied on her chest, and a ribbon was tied on her belt. Sei acted as if he hadn't heard Runamilia's question. He looked at the girls, then his face turned slightly red, and he said that the girls were pretty well dressed. Runamilia looked ahead and said that Sei measures strength by equipment. The carriage swayed from side to side as it drove along the uneven road. Sei replied that he needed to observe a little more. Runamelia said that she agrees with Sei. She still has a lot to learn from her. The guys came to a tall wooden building on which hung several flags and a sign with the image of cutlery and plates of food. Fluffy clouds floated above this building. The young man took his hand aside, and all the things that were in the room disappeared in an instant. Curtains fluttered on the large window from the wind, and the sun illuminated the whole room with light. There was a wooden mug with several plates on the table. There was a foaming drink and a piece of lemon in the mug. A dark-haired girl who was riding in a cart with the guys began to shout enthusiastically that everything was really delicious here. The dark-haired girl put the mug with the drink on the table. She lifted her finger up and said that she needed to supplement. A girl who looked like a waiter was standing next to her. He closed his eyes and thought about something. Then he held up his finger and said that in order to become a full-fledged adventurer, you need to be able to sense the danger approaching you. Sei and Runamelia were sitting at the table. Sei raised his hand and continued to say that Runamelia had left all her things in the cart, hadn't she? Runamelia looked at Sei attentively and answered his question positively. Runamelia said that the coachman turned out to be a pleasant person. Earlier, the coachman told Runamelia that he would look after her things so she might not stay. He changed his face and replied that this was exactly what he wanted to talk about. There were people sitting at the next table who looked very intimidating. Sei said that now Runamelia will meet a lot of confident adventurers on her way, some of whom may turn out to be bad. At another table sat equally frightening men in armor, with a small suitcase on their table. Sei went on to say that Runamelia shouldn't trust the coachman so easily. She should keep her things to herself. He was sitting on a wooden chair. Then he pushed back from the table and spread his arms. He started saying that he was a porter. If he stole things and dealt with their owner, then he would not be able to use them. He was an exception in some way. A man in a long coat was sitting at one of the tables with a suitcase next to him. He went on to say that those who put things at their feet always stay on the alert. The same man with the suitcase had a large hunting knife peeking out from under his raincoat, which was attached to his belt. He went on to say that if anyone dares to touch such a person's belongings, he will immediately use his weapon. The young man took a hood in his hands and threw it over his head. He had a rope with an unusual decoration hanging around his neck. Sei thought that by the time she grows up and they go on a real journey together. He put his hand on the table and rested his chin on it. He looked at Runamelia and said that if she relaxed her vigilance, her things would immediately be stolen. Money is very important in this world. There are people who are willing to do anything for money. Sei looked suspiciously at Runamelia. She lifted her hand and put it to her face. Then she said that he was talking about scary things right now. Sei leaned on the back of a wooden chair and began to say that Runamelia should not trust strangers so easily. Sei sat down normally and smiled slightly. Then he said that earlier Runamelia had asked him why he was hiding his face. He could give her one of the answers. Runamelia stared at Sei intently. Sei put his hands to his head and made a scary face. Then he approached Runamelia and started shouting that he could be a robber or an even scarier monster. After Sei made a face, Runamelia put her hand to her lips and laughed a little. Then she started to fart. Sei was very surprised by this reaction of the girl. He lowered his hands a little and looked at her. Then Runamelia squinted a little, and with a smile on her face began to say that this was really a monster. How scared she was. She didn't know what to do next. Sei gradually lowered his hands to the bottom. He looked in surprise in front of him. Then he began to think that Runamelia was really hopeless. She was really the daughter of a nobleman who grew up unaware of evil intentions. Sei turned away from Runamelia. He leaned on the table and began to reflect that this innocence would one day lead Runamelia to trouble. If he wanted her to grow up, then she must experience real fear and thus imprinted it in her memory. Sei reflected that there would only be such an opportunity. At this time, they are watching the picture as a bandit approaches the cart and distracts the male coachman. Then the bandit pulls out a gun and stuns the coachman, who falls to the ground. The sun was shining very brightly. The city was located between mountains and hills, and there was a dense forest far from it. The bandit grabs the first suitcase in his hands and rushes on the run with an evil smile on his face. The coachman is lying on the stone floor. Then he gets up and starts shouting that this bandit is a thief. Sei had his hand on the back of a wooden chair. He looked at what was happening in surprise, and was a little surprised. Runamelia was sitting next to him. She opened her mouth wide and her eyes widened in surprise and even dropped her sandwich. A man with a bandage on his head and eyes grinned angrily and ran away with several suitcases that were lying in the wagon of Sei and Runamelia. The coachman had a bruise on his head. He was looking after the thief and shouting. Sei stood up. Then he pointed his finger forward and said that the thief had taken Runamelia's suitcase. She stood there and began to scream nervously. Beads of sweat appeared on her face. The thief was running away as fast as he could. In one of his hands, he was holding a suitcase with 2 fastened straps. Runamelia started screaming that this suitcase was really hers. Sei got up from the table and looked out the window. Then he said that it was probably too late to go after the thief. There was a loud crash outside the window. Sei turned his gaze to Runamelia, and she began to cry bitterly. Sei thought that he could quickly catch up with the thief, but this is a good opportunity to teach Runamelia common sense. You can tell by her reaction that there was something important in the suitcase. Runamelia put her hands to her face, and drops of tears appeared on it. Sei continued to reflect that Runamelia had left something valuable in the carriage. Trusting the coachman, she should learn a good lesson from this story. Runamelia's whole face was covered in tears. She was crying bitterly. Her hands were slightly propped against her face, and she was looking at Sia pitifully. Sei looked at Runamelia. Then he looked in front of him. He thought for a while, and then said that Runamelia should be waiting for him here. He was walking through a dense forest, along a small path. There was a clatter of hooves nearby. Men with weapons and armor were sitting on horses. One of the men called out to Sei. He turned at the call of the men. He was wearing a hood. He opened a window and climbed on it. He said he would be back in a while. Sei's hair and cloak began to develop from the gusty wind. The thief was running down a narrow alley. This one with an unperturbed expression ran down a parallel street and almost overtook the thief, with suitcases in his hands. Sei was in the air. He saw a thief with a bandage on his face and thought that the thief was trying to escape through a narrow alley. It would be problematic to catch him if Sei cooled down even a little. The next moment, a thief with a bandage on his face met a girl on his way and angrily shouted at her that she should get out of the way. The girl turned towards the thief. He was watching the girl from the side. She placed her grocery bag on a wooden crate, then crouched down and picked up a few small pebbles from the ground. The girl took her foot aside and began to throw up the pebbles that she had just picked up from the ground. Sei activated his ability to look at the girl's characteristics and was very surprised to see them. The girl's hair was blowing in the wind, and her expression was very serious. Sei saw that this girl's name was Zophie. She was 16 years old and one had the job of an assassin, the 12th level. Zophie swings and throws one of the pebbles towards the thief. The pebble flies and hits right into the foot of the fleeing thief. A thief with a bandage on his face starts jumping on one leg and screaming in pain. At the same time, he did not drop any stolen items. The thief stopped at a wooden box with buckets. Zophie had another pebble in her hand, and she swung it again and threw it in the direction where the bag thief had stopped. 2 horsemen stopped next to her. He said that he could be of some use to these men. One of the men said it was reckless to walk in such places without a weapon. The men started looking at Sei in surprise. The pebble flew towards the thief at breakneck speed. Then it hit the thief in the face. A tooth fell out of his mouth from the blow. Then the thief, along with the stolen items, fell into a nearby wooden box and scattered buckets. The bandit lay on the floor for a while. Clouds of dust came out from under him. Then he quickly got up and ran away again, saying that he did not intend to give up so easily. Passers-by were watching what was happening. Sei continued to run after the thief. Then he said that the throwing ability of that assassin girl is quite high. He was running down a street where there were a lot of people. 2 men were watching the chase. One of them had a mustache. A girl with a staff in her hands told them that they needed to step aside. A dark-haired girl in a hood held a staff in one hand, which began to flicker, and in the other hand, she held a wooden mug. The wind began to rise from her witchcraft, and the people who were standing next to her moved aside. The bandit made a surprised expression on his face, on which drops of sweat began to roll. The thief was holding several stolen items in his hands. The bandit's legs began to open from the ground, and he hung in the air. He held the stolen items in his hands and shouted that he did not understand what was happening now. Dust and rocks rose into the air with the thief. The dark-haired girl pointed her magic staff forward and said that the thief had just disturbed her tea party. The next moment, a loud sound rang out, and everything around began to glow and spin in the gusty wind. The dark-haired girl held a magic staff in her hand, which emitted sparks. Then she closed one eye and said that the thief should disappear. The thief's face twisted even more, and he began to be carried away by the hurricane. Several things fell from him. Sei recalled how he studied a lot of things in order to keep up with other adventurers, how he sat at a table with people. Sei thought that he couldn't even finish the copper grade. He remembered the gold coins. He stood silently and looked away. Because of his hood and hair, it was impossible to see his face. The man examined Sei's pendant and said that it was really this porter. The column was engraved with hands with a pouch and various inscriptions. There were many drops of sweat on the thief's face. He opened his mouth wide, which was missing one tooth, and began to scream loudly. Sei activated his ability and said with a smile on his face that this girl was in excellent control of magic. There was a loud bang on the roof of the house. A thief fell there. Sei looked to the side and said that the girl had adjusted the size of the tornado so that it would not destroy everything around. However, because of this, there was not enough firepower. The thief was lying on the broken tiles of the house. He stood up a little and then rushed to run again. The dark-haired girl was looking away and holding a wooden mug in her hands. Several men stood in front of her. Beads of sweat could be seen on their faces. One of them began to nervously shout that the thief could still run. He was really cool. A thief with stolen goods was running along one of the roofs of houses. He looked at the thief and began to say that the thief should stop forcing him to spend time and effort chasing him. Sei's cloak and his hair fluttered in the gusty wind. The blonde girl with short hair, who attacked the thief with stones, stood behind Sei and began to look at him carefully. Sei adjusted his hood. Then he smiled and said that there were more and more people on the street. But that was the end for the thief. He began to push off with his foot. Smoke and lightning bolts began to appear from under it. He started to smile broadly and rushed forward. Sei activated his lightning step ability. So I ran along the roof of the house, and this one slipped under the cart and started running into the rhubarb with the thief, only on the ground. He found himself in a narrow alley. He started climbing up the roofs of the building to the thief. The thief was standing on top of the roof on one leg, and he was holding stolen items in his hands. Sei jumped onto one of the roofs. Then he began to lean on it, with his hands and feet to push off. Sei put his hands in front of him. The next moment, a crossbow appeared in Sei's hands, from which he fired, and an arrow with a rope flew out of it. Sei raised his head a little. His face was still not visible because of the hood. Sei replied that the man was right. He was heading from Mokta to Amberius with a cargo. He was also very confident in his escape skills and therefore did not hire an escort. The thief was running across the roof. He was holding a stolen suitcase in his hands. The next moment, a rope hung over the thief, which was released by Sei from a crossbow. The thief felt this, one looming over him, and looked up in fright. This one almost caught up with the thief. This one began to smile maliciously with his white teeth. The hair and fur on his hood fluttered in the wind. Sei turned up behind the thief, and with an evil smile on his face, Sei began to say that a thief should not underestimate the profession of a porter. There were drops of sweat on the thief's face, and the thief opened his mouth wide in fright. The next moment, Sei put his foot forward. He makes a lower roll towards the thief. His leg began to shine brightly. He puts his foot forward and cuts the thief. The thief stumbles and flies at them screaming. But he did not let go of the stolen suitcase. The thief squeezed his eyes shut, but he hears a ringing sound and abruptly opens them. The thief sees that his leg was shackled with a stone-black ball. The thief flies upside down to the ground while not letting go of the stolen suitcase. The thief falls to the ground in a wooden box. The fragments of the box fly in different directions from the impact. Sei lands on his haunches, his hair and cloak billowing in the wind. The thief was lying on the remains of a wooden box and moaning in pain, while he did not let go of the stolen suitcase. There was dust around the thief. This one began to approach the thief. A gloomy shadow was falling over the thief. The thief's face was covered in sweat and abrasions. In fright, the thief opened his mouth, which caught one of his teeth. Shi's face was very gloomy, and his eyes were shining brightly. He stood in front of the thief and began to say that the game of catch-up was over, of course, if the thief did not want to die. The thief made a face of horror, a man in a helmet with feathers sticking out of it. I held the reins and looked at Sei. Then he said the chance of meeting a monster was very small, but it was he and his partner who patrolled this road and dealt with these monsters. He looked at the thief with a terrifying look and angrily said that the thief should immediately give him this wooden suitcase. The thief had shackles on his leg. The thief looked at Xie in fright and held the stolen suitcase tightly. The thief got angry and threw the stolen suitcase against the wall. This act greatly surprised Sei. Then the thief clenched his teeth hard and several sharp objects appeared in his hands. The thief quickly began to unscrew the nuts from the shackles that Sei had put on him. The bolts from the shackles began to fall to the ground, and the lock opened. Sei saw this and was very surprised. As soon as the thief freed himself from the shackles, he began to run away quickly. Sei silently watched what was happening. Dust rose into the air. The thief began to smile maliciously and say that he was saying goodbye to Sei. Sei should also not think that he could catch him. The thief wanted to say something else, but his conversation was abruptly interrupted. A moment later, the thief found himself on the ground with his fifth point up, on which his foot was standing. Sei caught the thief and then said that he had already said before that the escape would end in nothing. Sparks were coming from Sei's leg, and road dust was rising into the air. He looked thoughtfully into them and thought that the thief had simply increased his workload. The surrounding people stood and looked at Sei and the captured thief. He began to pick up the stolen suitcase. Sei took hold of the handle and the lock opened. While Sei thought that there were similar thieves everywhere, but he didn't have to chase after everyone. Well, at least he would return Runamelia's things back. He picked up the suitcase, but things started to fall out of it since the lock was broken. There were people standing nearby and watching Sei's actions. Two girls who were standing not far from Sei blushed sharply and began to scream in horror. Sei looked away in surprise. One of the passers-by said that the object was rolling. The man in the helmet looked at Xie angrily and arrogantly and continued to say that, however, no one canceled the chances of encountering robbers. He looked down and listened to the man's story. Sei held the suitcase in his hands and did not move. The people who surrounded Sei began to laugh and whisper loudly. There were several books and one elongated object on the ground. He looked down. Beads of sweat appeared on his face, and his gaze became full of horror. Sei stood motionless, beads of sweat running down his face, and in his hands he held a wooden suitcase of Runamelia. Not far from Sei, an incomprehensible elongated object was lying on the ground. The object that was lying on the ground had an obscene shape. His face was covered in drops of sweat. He was breathing heavily, as he was in a panic and did not understand what to do next. Sei was holding a wooden suitcase, from which an obscene object fell out. Sei's hands began to shake with fear. He continued to breathe heavily. Scarlet was standing behind the girls who had previously blushed and started screaming from confusion. Scarlet looked towards the obscene object that had fallen. As soon as she realized what the object was, Scarlet blushed and began to scream loudly. Beads of sweat were running down Sei's face, and he abruptly turned in the direction from where Scarlet started screaming. Xia's face was scared and thoughtful. Sei continued to hold Runamelia's wooden suitcase. Then he began to look around nervously and look for a way out of the situation. He saw the face of 16-year-old Zophie, with adults standing behind her. The next moment, Zophie's face turned red. She measured the length of the obscene object and began to try on this length for herself. Zophie's face was covered in sweat and had a surprised expression. Zophie looked down in surprise. Then she turned her gaze to Sei, who was sweating and holding a wooden suitcase in his hands. Then Sei's cloak lifted in the gusty wind, and Zophie looked at his hips. The next moment, the man who was riding a horse and wearing a helmet began to reach for his weapon. Sei looked at the man. He noticed his actions. Sei, in turn, reached for his weapon. Everything that was happening was accompanied by dead silence. Zophie's jacket slipped off her crying. She thoughtfully leaned her hand against her chin. Her gaze was completely devastated. Zophie stood for a while with her hand on her chin, and the most complicated calculations began in her head. Zophie was wearing a dark ribbon with a pendant around her neck. Sei didn't take his eyes off Zophie's face, but something else caught his attention. Rudamelia stood apart from everyone. A headscarf was on her head, and her hair was blowing in the wind. She raised her hand a little and stared in front of her. Lost. Sei did not move and held Runamelia's wooden suitcase in his hands. Then he turned his gaze to her. Runamelia stood and looked at Sei. Sei looked at the floor. Beads of sweat were running down his face, and he thought and remembered the expression on Runamelia's face when she saw how a thief stole her suitcase. The moment the thief stole Runamelia's suitcase, she blushed all over. Then she started crying and shouting that it was her suitcase that was stolen. Realizing Runamelia's reaction and comparing everything in his head, Sei's face changed. As he became aware, Sei's face gradually began to relax, and eventually he closed his eyes and began to smile. Then he completely relaxed and began to lower the wooden suitcase to the bottom. Sei made a knowing expression on his face and began to gradually turn towards where Runamelia was standing. As soon as Sei turned to Runamelia, he saw that Runamelia panicked. She put her hands to her face and began to cry bitterly and suffocate. Xia's face also changed. He frowned and was afraid for Runamelia's condition. Runamelia began to shake with fear. She began to breathe heavily, and her legs gradually began to give way from stress. After a moment, the man in the helmet starts walking forward and tells Sei that he has to be careful on this road. Sei agreed with him and leaned slightly after the men, who were moving forward on horseback. Sei stared at Runamelia with his mouth open, sweat dripping down his face. Then he covered his mouth and made a serious expression. Then Sei's face began to gradually change. His mouth gradually began to acquire a smile, and Sei himself barely restrained laughter. The surrounding people who were watching Sei's actions became frightened when they heard Sei laughing. Drops of sweat trickled down the shocked faces of the surrounding people. Sei picked up an obscene object from the floor, and in his other hand he held Runamelia's wooden suitcase. Then Sei nervously started saying that he was glad that he had received the order. The surrounding people looked at Sei nervously. Some people stretched out their arms. A crazy smile appeared on Xia's face, and he said that if this obscene object had been stolen, he would have lost his client. He was holding an obscene object in his hand, and in his other hand, he was holding a wooden suitcase of Runamelia. His face was full of horror, and his mouth was wide open. Sei continued to say loudly that, after all, this thing is very expensive. Scarlet was standing to one side. She was all red, and she also held her hand in the air near her face. There was a blonde girl standing next to Scarlet. She was also in shock. Sophie was standing on the other side of the crowd, her eyes bulging in surprise. There were several men and a girl in a headscarf standing behind Sophie. They were all shocked. Sei was holding a suitcase and an unusual object in his hands. Then he turned to the coachman and said that if he was all right, Sei could look at him if he was injured. The coachman turned away from Sei and said that everything was fine with him. Sei made a crazy expression on his face and started saying that he could use healing magic on the coachman and instantly cure him. The coachman would immediately feel much better. The coachman began to refuse Sei's offer. He began to smile and wave his hand as a farewell after the men. After a moment, Sei made a serious expression and began to lower his hand. A hood was put on his head, hair sticking out from under it. The coachman had a bump on his head. Sei headed towards the coachman, who began to cover himself with his hands in a panic and shout that Sei should not approach him. After a while, 2 horse-drawn carts were driving along a stone road, with a dense forest and high mountains ahead of them. He was sitting on a bench in the cart. He crossed his legs and folded his hands together. There were several men sitting next to Sei, but they were sitting far away from Sei. There were also wooden boxes and bags with various items in the cart. There was dead silence in the carriage. Only the clatter of the horses' hooves and the creaking of the wheels could be heard. Xia's expression was suspicious and confused. 2 carts followed each other along a road that followed every bend of the nearby river. On the side of the river and the road there were densely planted trees, and on the other side of the forest there were high mountains. One of the carts was traveling fast along a stone road. Grass and low shrubby plants grew along the stone road. Hoofbeats sounded everywhere. Scarlet sat in silence, her lips moving and trying to decide to say something. After a while, she raised her head. Her eyebrows were furrowed and her face was red. She decided and said that she wanted to pick flowers. It was worth stopping the cart. A dark-haired man with a hat on his head held the reins. Then he said that there were a lot of monsters in this place. It was not worth going too far from the road. Scarlet replied that the man should not worry. She knows some fighting skills. The dark-haired man adjusted his cap with his hand and replied that it was not bad. In that case, they should rest a little. If the girl sees a monster, she should immediately deal with it. Both carts stopped on a stone road, and the people who were riding in them began to go out on the road to stretch a little. There was a river next to the road, and on the other side of the river there was a forest. Behind it there was a view of high mountains. Tall treetops towered over the road, and mountains could be seen beyond the sad forest. One of the men asked the second one if they had done the right thing to let this boy go. He looked too suspicious for these places. This one also got out of the cart onto the road, which was paved with stone. He looked at the water in which he saw his reflection. Sei was looking down. He squinted his eyes a little and thought about something. Sei's hair was a little disheveled, and his hood hung over his shoulders. Sei turned to Scarlet and said that there might be monsters in this place. He could first check for their presence around. Scarlet lowered her head and closed her eyes. She did not begin to answer that she would refuse Sei's offer. There was no one behind the bushes. Sei looked at Scarlet. He made a surprised expression on his face as something interesting caught his attention. Sei looked at Scarlet, moving away from him, and thought that he could feel the flow of magic from the girl. Most likely, she could check the area for monsters with her magic. Scarlet was holding her magic staff in her hands. After thinking for a while, Scarlet started to turn back to where Sei was standing. She thoughtfully wanted to say something. Scarlet's hair was twisted into curls. Scarlet turned around, and with an arrogant expression on her face, said that Sei should not try to talk to her anymore, since he was very strange. Sei smiled nervously. Scarlet's words angered him, and he began to follow her with an evil look. Sei's face changed. He felt someone's presence next to him. Sei shifted his gaze from Scarlet to the side next to him. Zofie was standing next to Sei. Her jacket had slipped off her shoulders. She put on a straight face at Sei. Zofie had a tail made on her head. Sei looked at Zofie in surprise. Sei had his hands in his pockets. He looked down at Zofie. The girl took her hands behind her back. Her face turned red in a moment. She also looked at her carefully. There was grass growing on the ground next to the road. The second horseman lowered his head and said that this boy could be a scout for the nearest bandit group, which may have targeted a trade convoy. The man who was riding in front started to run away. He looked at Zofie. He made a surprised expression on his face and said that maybe she needed something from him. There was a dense forest and high mountains behind him. Zofie blushed even more and put her hand to her lips. Then she thought about it. Zofie held her hands up, her face red from displacement. Zofie looked at herself and started asking him stupid questions. Sei smiled nervously and closed his eyes. Then he said that it seemed Zofie had misunderstood something. Sei and Zofie were looking towards the river and the forest that surrounded it. Sei broke the silence and said that the item, as he had already said, had been ordered. Zofie replied that she didn't have to pretend. She had an acquaintance who also liked such things. Sei continued to stare into the distance, and then he replied to Zofie that, first of all, he likes women. Zofie interrupted him and said that he should choose one thing, as well as he should not stand too close to her. Zofie stepped aside a little. There was a heart-rending scream not far from the guys. Sei made a serious expression and turned in the direction from where he heard the scream. Zofie also looked away in surprise. Sei abruptly took off and rushed towards the scream. Zofie stayed where she was. Sei made his way through trees and bushes. Then Sei had a weapon in his hands, and he thought that monsters and animals often gather near reservoirs. Sei made his way through the dense thickets, cutting them with his sword. At this, Sei's expression was very serious. Sei reflected that this place seemed quiet, which implied that not only predators were here, but also monsters. He raced through the bushes in the forest thicket. He noticed a tree broken in half in the ground. This greatly surprised Sei. He became even more wary. Sei finds himself in an open area. He breaks with his feet and lands on his knee. Sei's hair and cloak are blowing in the wind. Dust rises into the air from landing. Sei's eyes begin to glow and he turns back. Sei sees a huge monster. Its mouth is open, and big and sharp teeth stick out of it. Also, drool and steam began to flow from the monster's mouth. The man who spoke to her smiled and said that this guy was just a porter. He had the lowest profession possible. He had many low characteristics and the worst growth rate. He was standing in a fighting position. He had a sharp weapon in his hands. At this time, a huge toothy monster hung over the seed. The monster had huge claws, and the body consists of links, like a scolopendra. He was standing on the ground in front of a huge monster. Sei activated his assessment ability and his characteristics appeared in front of the monster. A huge barefoot red-headed, which had a 25th level. Sei stood and stared up at the huge monster, unperturbed. Sei's hair and cloak fluttered in the wind. Then, Sei's gaze shifted to the side. Sei looks to the side and sees Scarlet lying on the ground. Her underwear was pulled down, and she went to the toilet. Scarlet also held her staff in her hands while her face was all red with embarrassment. He was looking at Scarlet. The jet that was coming out of Scarlet was pouring onto the ground. Next to the guys, there was a beautiful view of the lush edges of the forest and mountains. There was also an angry monster next to the guys. Sei turned around abruptly. He raised one hand, and in the other hand was a sharp sword. He leaned forward and smiled slightly. The wind that blew next to the seed lifted the leaves of the trees into the air. He held up his sword in front of him and said with a serious expression on his face that who would have thought that such a beautiful view opens here. Scarlet was sitting on the ground. Her face was all red with embarrassment, and she was holding her staff in her hands. After hearing the words from Sei, Scarlet blushed even more and began to scream nervously that really Sei had managed to see her after all. He held his hand in front of him. Then his face became even more pleased, and with a smile on his face he said that Scarlet was right. He had seen everything in good quality. This story will be about a guy who did not own a combat profession, but he intends to conquer the world. He was reborn into a porter with a special storage skill. He chose a dream instead of strength. He was lying surrounded by several girls. Sei nervously moved his hand. He heard the men's words, then Sei adjusted his hood with his hands. Mujicina continued to say that this representative of a peaceful profession, even if he were a member of the group, it would not matter much. The men rode horses and said that the porters had a storage skill that could be used for crimes and reprisals, but they were still prohibited from entering important facilities. This one was going in the opposite direction. He continued walking along the road, which was surrounded by a sad forest. Sei removed the hood from his head and began to look around, and Sei also had something in his hands. The man went on to say that the porters are among the weakest in the world. This one turned out to be on a hill overlooking a small town. This cloak and scarf began to develop from the wind. The city was surrounded by a small forest and high mountains. The sun's rays fell on the city houses. They had a different appearance, not similar to each other. There were a lot of people on the streets of the city. Because of this, it was very noisy. The girl was standing against a brick wall. She had a beautiful jewel with a stone above her chest. Next to her, the voices of men could be heard, who began to harass her with obscene proposals. A short girl stood surrounded by several men who looked very intimidating. The girl's face was red and scared. She had a hood on her head from under which blonde hair was sticking out. She put her hands on her chest. The men looked at the girl strangely. They smiled and said that they could take the girl to a wonderful place. She should go with them and they would tell her everything about the city. He was on one of the streets of the city. He was walking in the crowd and noticed how several men surrounded and pressed a short girl against the wall. He stopped in the middle of the street, not far from the place where several men surrounded a girl who was standing against the wall. It was the middle of the night outside. The dark sky was illuminated by a large moon and many stars. Screams could be heard in one of the townhouses. The guy and the girl were on the bed. The guy was behind the girl who looked like a cat. The girl put her hands to her face. She wanted to say something, but did not dare. The men asked her that she was willing to go with them. Sei was watching from the sidelines. The girl joined her hands together. Her face was red. She looked at the men and enthusiastically said that the men's offer was very tempting. She has never been to this city and will be happy to hear a story about it. As soon as he heard the girl's words, his face changed. He narrowed his eyes accusingly and looked towards where the girl was standing with several men. The inside of the hood was lined with fluffy fur. The men's faces turned red, and they began to look even weirder. The men took the girl by the arms and went forward in parallel, trying to tell her something. He put his hands in his pocket and watched the man and the girl walking away. He was ready to leave, but suddenly he stopped. He looked ahead and began to say that this girl was not too careless. She looked ignorant and naive. Maybe she was the daughter of a nobleman. Various people were passing by Sei at this time. Sei smiled. He looked up and then closed his eyes. He said that men are too inept at dating girls. Really, someone will be able to get them, on the other hand. This should not concern Sei at all. The next moment, Sei remembers the girl who was covered in blood. She was lying on the ground and stroking Sei's face. After the remembered moment, Sei's face changed a lot. It became gloomy, and he stopped smiling. Sei continued to stand in the middle of the street, the road of which was paved with stone tiles. Various people passed by Sei. On one of the houses, the window was built right into the roof. This house was on the face where this one was now. The girl and the men found themselves next to an unkempt house. Its windows were broken and the walls were cracked. There were trees nearby. A blond young man was hugging a girl with cat ears. The girl's face was all red. They were touching their bodies. The girl entered the house first. She was holding the strap of her small bag in her hands. The girl said she was wondering what could be in this house. The men walked behind her and told her that it would be a surprise, and now she would tell them everything. Malicious smiles appeared on the men's faces. They closed the door behind them with a large board. Then the men began to gradually approach the girl, who was standing with her back to them. There was only one light in the entire room. The men held the girl horizontally, so that her underwear was visible from under her clothes. The man began to unbutton his fly and say that this girl's skin was really lovely. Now he would serve her. In the next moment, the man's face was severely distorted. The eyes on the man's face began to roll up, and saliva sprayed from his mouth. There were other men standing nearby who looked at him in surprise. Behind the man who was unbuttoning his fly, there was a guy. He struck the man right between the legs. The man bent over and lowered his arms from the blow. The surrounding men were surprised by Sia's sudden appearance. They were even scared. Sei stood behind the men, his hands in his trouser pockets. The same expression on Sei's face was unperturbed. The man who was attacked by Sei fell to the floor. The other men were outraged and did not understand where this one came from. The blond man started shouting that he had to explain himself, but the next moment, Sei grabbed the man by his clothes. Drops of sweat appeared on the face of the blonde, dissatisfied man, who was very scared of Sei's act. He made a grab and knocked the blond man to the ground. As soon as the man reached the floor, there was a loud bang and the man's face contorted in pain. Sei wrapped his arm around the man's neck and then put a knife to him, while Sei said that the other men needed to move away. If they came closer, then the blond man would not be well. The man looked at Sei's knife in fright. A bald man with a bare torso smiled and raised his hands up. A weapon was hidden behind his back, and a bag hung by his side. Then they kissed each other. The girl and the guy continued to lie on the bed. She screamed with pleasure and meowed loudly. The bald man held his hands up and said that he was acting like a knight who was trying to save the princess. It looked very cool. He held the blond man and said that he was really the boss here. The bald man smiled and said that this one should calm down. He should know what is more important, a whole subordinate or a randomly found merchant. A dark-haired man and a beast man were holding a girl who was lying on the floor. The ceiling of the building could be seen above them. The bald man said he was sorry that they had touched Sei's girlfriend. The bald man held his hands over the canopy and said with a smile that his subordinates were too young and short-tempered, for which he also apologized. The man had a bag slung over his shoulder. Sei held a knife at the throat of the blond man and replied that they should release the girl. Then they should move away and then Sei would release the prisoner. Dark silhouettes were visible behind Sei. The bald man continued to smile and agree with Sia's order. Then his face darkened, and he said that his subordinate was so scared that he was going to defecate in his pants. This should not be seen by others. He looked at the bald man with a serious expression on his face. The blond man had tears in his eyes. He looked away and did not understand what was going on here. The next moment, the bald man is behind Sei's back. The bald man was armed and started swinging. Then he disappears, and the bald man delivers a crushing blow to the blond guy. His body parts scattered around the room. The bandits were standing to the side, looked around. One of them smiled maliciously. The blond man's insides were even on the walls. There was a blood stain on the floor where the blond man had been lying, on which the bald man's weapon was lying. He said that the man would give this advice, that before saving the girl, you need to evaluate your opponent. The man was grinning. There was a splash of white substance. A girl with cat ears was lying in the arms of a guy. He put a jug on the bedside table. The girl was lying on the guy's stomach and said that she loved Sei. The guy looked at the girl. He replied that he agreed with the bald man. The bald man glared viciously in the direction from which Sia's voice came. Sei landed away from the bandits. A girl was in his arms. Sei lowered his head without showing his face. The bald man looked away and said that Sei had lightning-fast legs. There were other bandits nearby, and they were shocked by the speed of Sei. Sei got to his feet. He put his arm around the girl's back and said if she could stand. The girl nodded. A bald man with a scar on his face narrowed his eyes and looked suspiciously at Sei. Then he said that this was really this girl's bodyguard. Sei's hair covered his face. He replied to the man that it was not important now. The girl opened her mouth in fright. She joined her hands together and found herself behind Sei. Sei moved forward and took a fighting stance. Then he said that in fact he was an adventurer, even though he was only a porter. The dark-haired man was hit in the face by the girl's heel. He screamed in pain. Several bandits held the girl's legs and said that the girl turned out to be a tough nut to crack, but she does not have a high level. She has recently become an adult. One of the bandits used a grip on the girl. His face came close to her face, and he said that they had an experienced warrior Job. The rest of the bandits started laughing and supported their partner's words. The bandits looked at Sei in surprise. They said, "Is he really a porter? This is the weakest profession available." This one was not indignant. He was holding his cloak with his hand. A girl was standing behind him. One of the bandits began to show a smile and laughed. Then the bandit said that this one was probably very stupid and he did not know his place. They just laughed at his actions. He stood in place and listened to the men's conversation. He stared straight ahead, unperturbed. He activated his analysis ability. There were several wooden floors above the ceiling. One of the bandits said that they would have to have fun with the girl a little later, and now they would deal with Sei. Sei was looking at the men. 2 of the 4 were armed. One of them was wearing a cloak. He had the profession of a 17th level assassin. The second was a swordsman of the 15th level. The third was a boxer of the 10th level, and the fourth was a warrior of the 20th. A girl with cat ears and a tail was lying on Sei's chest. She said that she wanted to stay with him forever. The boys were in a dark room with large windows from which the moonlight illuminated everything around. Men began to lick his sharp blade and say that this loser, who does not know his place, he intends to test his Geminite sword on this one. This one will regret contacting them. He closed his eyes and sighed heavily. He calmly replied that in this world there is nothing more important than a profession. People with strong professions are almost invincible. Weak people naturally become victims. To confront them with the profession of a porter, it's all exactly what will challenge themselves. The girl stared in front of her in surprise. Her hands were joined and folded on her chest. The bandits glared at Sia. Then they armed themselves and began to stretch their arms. Sei put his hand on his belt, and with his other hand, he began to scratch the back of his head. Sei smiled slightly and said that, in any case, these men would lose to him, the weakest loser. Sei put his fingers to his face. Then he smiled maliciously and continued to say that don't men think that they will become even lower than Sei himself. Her jacket was unbuttoned and fur was sticking out of the hood. The blonde man started shouting and swinging at the side where Sei was standing. Sei held out his nunchucks in front of him, into which the blade of the bandit's sword pierced. Sei kicked the bandit. He was thrown aside. Sei took a fighting stance. The blonde man looked at his hand in horror. There was no sword there. The man pointed his hand towards Sei and shouted that, where could his sword have gone? A beastman rushed towards Sei, shouting that Sei was using the storage skill. The beastman with one eye started shouting that all the bandits should attack Sei at the same time. The rest of the bandits rushed towards Sei. They were armed. One of the bandits wanted to grab Sei, but Sei managed to dodge. He began to attack the other bandits in turn. A beastman with an eye patch got kicked in the face by Sei. The beastman with an eye patch looked viciously at Xie, who kicked him in the face. He was in a horizontal position and looked at the opponent with a serious expression on his face. A monster of enormous size appears in front of the main character. With a predatory grin, he watches the young man, ready to attack him at any suitable moment. The young man understands that you will not go against such an opponent alone. A majestic forest stretches at the foot of the mountain. The wind shakes the leaves of the trees, which makes the forest seem to come to life. Somewhere in the distance, a flock of alarmed birds rises into the sky. Apparently, they were scared off by someone making their way through the thicket. Luna Maria uses her wonderful healing magic, which many have already heard about, and heals the wounds of patients with its help. Lola, that was the name of the main character's companion, whom he also, like the nun, saved from a terrible monster, is watching the treatment process. The nun says that everything will be fine now. Lola replies that it's incredible because she feels better. She turns to Luna Maria and says that she wants to express her great gratitude to her for everything that she has done for her. The nun replies that it's not worth it at all. She says that if a girl has to thank someone, it's Sai-sama. That's how the heroine is surprised. She is surprised that the main character's name is Seisama, because she did not know the name of the young man she liked before. At this time, an unknown woman approaches the men who were happy earlier that they had defeated all the insects. She exclaims with an intelligent look that one of the insects is the larva of a giant red-headed centipede that lives in these parts. The woman explains that they are poisonous and very dangerous. It is possible that this place is not so often sprayed with holy water to scare away monsters, due to the fact that this area is far from the city. Fortunately, most of them are adventurers. One of the comrades says that they could make a big profit if it was an adult. His friend replies that they have already given their all to defeat those maggots. If it had been an adult, they simply would not have survived. Lola, who is standing not far from them, listens to the conversation of these two people. She hears one of them telling his friend that everything could have been completely different if there had been a hero next to them at this difficult moment. The girl turns and meets the gaze of a nun sitting on the ground. She continues to stare in front of her with a clouded gaze. She indulges in her dreams and fantasies of the relative protagonist who reminded her of that night. Meanwhile, the young man is laying out his tools. He is enthusiastically whistling some cheerful song and digging into the insides of his former opponent. The main character clicks something, cuts and squeezes the insides of the beast with his hands. A silhouette of a fragile girl can be seen among the trees. The heroine makes her way through dense thickets of bushes. To make her way through the thorny path, she pushes aside branches and bushes that meet on her way. It's not easy for her to follow such a path. The brave young man freezes with a rag in his mouth and thinks. The young man is carefully looking for something very important and valuable for him inside the monster. From the entrails of the defeated monster, the main character suddenly pulls out a stone of extraordinary beauty and cut. The young man carefully holds it in his hand and carefully examines it under the rays of the sun. The main character soon evaluates this item and comes to the conclusion that this magic stone in one copy belongs to the 7th class of all possible ones. The young man realizes that in front of him is a very good pebble, which can go out to him for 2 large silver coins if the young man suddenly wants to sell it. Otherwise, he can use it as a material for medicine. The sorceress imperceptibly approaches the main character from behind and asks if it is true that he saw everything. The young man indifferently replies to the heroine that he actually did not see anything at all. At this moment, he is tensing up, trying to hide his excitement. The girl looks at her interlocutor inquisitively and says that the reaction of the main character speaks for itself. The young man tries to pretend that he doesn't care, but he doesn't do it well. The main character asks the sorceress what she is talking about, and notes that he himself was focused on the centipede, so he does not understand what the girl is driving at. The heroine follows him closely and tells the young man to listen to her carefully. She warns that if he tells her anything, she will roast him like that monster. The hero replies that he doesn't know what she's talking about, but he won't tell anyone anyway. Lunamaria intervenes in the conversation. She turns to the sorceress and says that this is too much on her part. The girl notes that he risked his life in battle with the same monster. Lola confirms, because if it wasn't for him, the outcome of the battle is unknown. The sorceress is surprised by such pressure from the support group. She stews and partly agrees with the girls, saying that maybe it's true. The girl does not finish the sentence to the end, because she doubts the correctness of these unspoken words. Suddenly, the girl hears a rustle. The heroine is wary, because anyone can be waiting for her among the trees. Virgo does not have time to understand what happened, as an unknown monster swirls right in front of her nose. She shrank away from him. The main character smiles awkwardly and looks at the young sorceress. She clicks her tongue in disgust and blushes. The girl mumbles something completely inarticulate under her breath with annoyance in her voice. Mountains rise against the background, surrounded by dense forest. A procession of wagons is creaking along the road. A voice is heard from one of the wagons. He asks permission to introduce himself to the heroes again. This voice belongs to Lunamaria. The girl says that she is a nun from the Holy Church. The heroine tells that at the moment of her life she is on a monastic journey and is thinking how she could conquer the labyrinth in the lotus. Lola joins the acquaintance. She tells the heroes that she belongs to the assassins. In the past, she worked for a fairly large company, but something bad happened there. She was shut down. Now she is thinking of becoming an adventurer in the lotus. The third girl also gives her name. Her name is Scarlet, and she is a sorceress. The heroine graduated with honors from the Royal Magic Academy. Of all the job offers, she chose to become an adventurer because she wants to learn by becoming a witch. The turn to introduce himself comes to the main character. The young man tells that his name is Sei, and he is a porter. The charming young man slyly smiles at the girls and slyly says that he is on the same team as Lunamiria-sama. The reincarnated porter says that he also plans to become an adventurer in the Lotus. Lola smiles at him and says that this is their common goal. Scarlet notices that in the end, this carriage in which they are sitting is heading to the Lotus. The nun exclaims with admiration that it must be God's will for everything to happen. She believes that nothing in this world is done just like that, without the knowledge of the Lord. She turns to her companions and asks them why. Since they are already friends and pals to each other, they should not form a group of adventurers under the leadership of the main character. The sorceress is amazed and shouts to her that there is no way. Lola, on the contrary, is very positive about this idea. She replies that she will agree to this without any problems because the main character saved her during a fight with a monster, and she now owes him for saving her. Besides, he's a pretty capable young man. Meanwhile, the monster flies headlong on. He is chasing the main character, who cannot break away from his pursuit in any way. The monster tries to grab the young man with its teeth and opens its mouth wide, full of fangs. The sorceress looks at her and says that this is very naive of her. She warns that the girl makes such a decision simply because she has not seen what other adventurers are capable of. There are a lot of people like him in the Lotus. She adds that in addition to what she said earlier, there is another nuance. If rumors spread that the sorceress is on the same team as the pervert, her reputation will be tarnished. The young man agrees, saying that it would be bad if someone found out about the embarrassment. The girl, pinned by the main character, jumps up from her seat and begins to wave her arms vigorously, shouting at the young man and swearing that she has given away her secret and is now blackmailing him with it. The cart continues its journey along the paved road towards the mountains. When the heroes arrive in the city, darkness is already falling on its surroundings. A group of adventurers stops at the hotel, heading to a luxury hut to spend the night there. And in the morning, as they wanted, they again set off on their journey towards the Lotus. One of the girls lets out an exclamation of admiration when she sees their future apartment. The main character proudly says that he has booked 2 cottages with a garden. The nun, who very rarely stayed overnight in such places, was glad. The young man said that when he was looking for a hotel, only 2 of these houses were available. A night in such a cottage did not cost the heroes so cheap, so the young man wanted to make sure that the girl was satisfied. She replied that there was no problem. Suddenly, the main character remembers something important that he wanted to do. He sighs. Complaining about the memory, he hands the nun a brand new suitcase. The girl is surprised by the unexpected gift. The young man explains that he bought this suitcase for the place of the one that broke down that very day due to the commotion. The main character knows how important he was to her, so he tells her to use this one, if desired. Gunamiria blushes and, sweetly holding out the name of the main character, thanks him for a valuable gift. She is very grateful to the young man for everything he has done for her. She considers the young man her patron, associating him with the apostle from her favorite book. The main character smiles at her and says that he does not understand what she is talking about. The young man believes that since the heroes are in the same team, they should take care of its members and, if anything, cover for each other. That's what anyone would do in his place, he believes. Without stopping the chase, the monster emits a thunderous and terrifying roar. He is about to grab the main character. The young man drops the height and falls down. He tells himself that in any case, he needs to get the monster away from that girl. The main character tells his girlfriend that they have a great hotel, so he advises the girl to have a good rest in the room and gain strength the next day. The nun responds in kind with gratitude in her voice, rejoicing at his concern for her. The young man waves his hand and moves away from his girlfriend. He leaves the girl standing on the porch of one of the cottages alone. She looks after the main character with embarrassment and gratitude. After moving away for some distance, the main character sighs with relief and thinks. The young man tells himself that now it is possible to pretend as if that device does not exist and never existed. He goes to his room and thinks about this subject along the way. To begin with, he has no evidence that she used it. The hero is sure that the girl has a reason to have such a thing. He decides that he will believe it. He looks at the moon hanging over the mountains and tells himself that he will do what he planned. The girl continues to stand near the porch of the cottage and clutching a suitcase in her hands. She looks very confused and excited after receiving a gift from the hero. The action takes place in a garden illuminated by the light of the moon. In one of its corners there is a bathtub with water, designed for bathing guests. Warm water is heated on a campfire in a vat. Singing is heard everywhere, signifying the good mood of the hero. The young man removes the vat from the fire and fills the tub with its contents, diluting the cold water with hot water. The main character throws flower petals at her to give an atmosphere of mystery and romance. He's going to make his plan come true. A young man climbed into a bathtub with his feet to soak in warm water in the fresh night air. The young man sighs with relief, feeling the warmth spreading throughout his body. He stretches out his legs, folding them on the edge of the tub. He says that a homemade outdoor bathtub is the best invention that could have been invented. The main character reinforces his speech with a strong word. He decides that he needs to enjoy the garden to the fullest from time to time. The young man sighs with relief and satisfaction. The main character remembers something and says that he almost forgot about it. The hero thinks about it and then says that he needs to lead his opponent into a deep thicket of the forest in order to escape from him later. At the same time, he can't decide whether he should go back to the others to fight him with his comrades. He complains that the drink next to him does not look like Japanese juice, but soon forgets about it and continues to enjoy the wonderful moment that falls to him very rarely. He exhales especially loudly after drinking a drink. The young man mentally turns to the moon of peace, assuming that a pure-minded nun has never bathed in an open-air bathroom in her life. He wonders if he should take this opportunity and invite her to his place. The main character drives these thoughts away from himself, deciding that they can be nothing more than a joke. He decides that it cannot be that a girl like her got into the same tub with a man, so the hero decides not to invite her, so as not to get into trouble. However, at the same second, lustful thoughts again overwhelm the young man. The main character thinks about it and tells himself that maybe what he dreams of is not so impossible in this situation, given the circumstances and his find. A young man vividly imagines himself hovering over a confused girl. In his thoughts, the main character showers the nun with compliments, saying how wonderful she is. He asks the heroine to show him more of her beautiful girlish body. The young man is trying to predict the reaction of the young maiden. He assumes that the heroine will shyly hide her eyes and try to cover her body from his gaze. She will timidly beg Seisama not to look at her untouched body. The young man asks the girl if they are not friends of each other. The main character says that the girl should not be embarrassed. She should relax next to him, because being nervous will not get rid of fatigue. She protests, saying that she is a servant of God. The young man calls Lunamiria by name. The main character turns to the girl and tells her in a quiet, languid voice that he does not care about such things. An ardent young man looks into the eyes of a nun and says that she is an indispensable member of the team for him. The girl can see it for herself. The young man says that he has already shown her everything he could, and now he is ready to give her his body. He looks intently into the trusting and wide-open eyes of the heroine. The main character convinces her to trust him. The young man says that she should open up to him and let him, since he is more experienced than her, handle it himself. While the young man is thinking, someone shouts at him to stand aside and let the unknown make an attack on the monster on his own. The young man does not expect that someone will shout such a thing to him, and therefore is very surprised to hear a voice from nowhere. The girl opens her fervent lips. She pronounces the name of the main character in such a voice, as if he had bewitched her. The nun's shyness passes, and she leans forward to meet the hot body of the protagonist. The girl says she is glad that the main character trusts her so much. She admits that she did not even know that the young man appreciated her so much. She opens up to him, addressing the main character by name. The girl asks the young man to examine every inch of her sensual body. The heroine wants him to imprint it in his memory. The hero is excited by these thoughts. The young man gets up from his seat and stretches his stiff back. The dreamy young man raises his eyes to the sky to collect his completely confused thoughts. The main character takes a container with a drink and brings it to his lips. He is too excited by his own fantasies to remain calm at the moment. After drinking the drink, the young man runs his hand through his hair and thinks again. The main character decides not to miss such a good moment and tries luck. He says out loud that he's going to invite the object of his fantasies to soak up in the garden. A young man jumps out of the tub. He calms himself down by saying that he is not thinking about anything perverted. The young man decides that he just wants to replenish the girl's stamina in the outdoor bathroom. He runs through the garden saying that he is looking for a friend. The main character heads to the heroine's cottage. On the way, the young man grabs a towel to tie it around his waist. He decides not to scare the nun from the doorway. The main character calms himself down so as not to betray excitement. A young man approaches the cottage door and prepares to knock on it. He shouts at Lunamiria, calling her by name to warn her of his arrival. At this moment, he hears a faint moan and the voice of the heroine. The young man is very surprised. The main character mentally exclaims, saying that it was close. He creeps cautiously to the door to eavesdrop on what is happening in the cottage. The young man asks himself if the heroine is really talking to someone in her room. The girl, who has been hiding in the depths of the forest among the trunks of ancient trees all this time, decides to take advantage of the moment and contribute to the victory over the monster. She pulls her knife out from under her cloak and runs to the brave young man's aid. The main character listens to the sounds in the cottage. There is no more rustling coming from there. The young man assumes that the girl is talking to herself. The young man asks himself if, in this case, the heroine can talk in her sleep. Fragments of phrases reach the ears of the main character again. It is obvious that the nun is dreaming about something, because she plaintively calls his name. The girl is breathing heavily and says she loves the young man. The main character freezes under her door in amazement. Listening to the sounds coming from the house, he expected to hear anything but this. Meanwhile, the girl continues to languidly call him by name, saying that she loves the young man. She clenches her legs excitedly and continues talking. She says that the main character is very strong and courageous, since he protected her from the beast. The heroine in her dream confesses to the young man that he is her ideal. The girl is tossing in bed, hugging a pillow, imagining the main character in her place. She repeats again that she is in love with the young man. The main character listens to his girlfriend's confession and leans against the wall of the cottage. The girl continues to moan, calling the young man her apostle herself. The young man thinks about it. He realizes that he has heard something that was not intended for his ears in any way. The main character decides that everything is clear to him now. The young man really felt an unusual tenderness and trust from the moment he met this Virgo. He recalls that in the Bible, in the tale of the pilgrimage of the saint, which the heroine has read more than once, there is an apostle of God who protects the saint. The main character realizes that the nun must see echoes of this very apostle in him. The main character says that apostle of God is an inappropriate title for him. The young man remembers the nun and realizes that this world is too cruel for her. The young man sadly thinks that if there is something that he would like to protect to the last, and what he would like to follow, then this cruel world will immediately take away this value from him. This happened to the young man throughout his life. The brave heroine clutches the blade tightly in her palm and boldly looks forward, intending to deliver a crushing blow to the terrible monster and protect the main character from the danger that threatens him. In her rush, she is ready to fight and go to the very end. The main character notices that his entire existence looks as if God himself is against him. A young man with a heavy heart decides that a porter, like him, will never be able to meet the expectations of the pure and beautiful nun, Lunamiria. She is too far away from him, and every day the hero realizes that the gap between them is only wider. The young man sadly turns away and is about to leave. The main character imagines himself to be a great adventurer in the future. A single-minded young man decides that, in order to win a girl, he needs to become able to protect what is dear. The young man decides that until he learns this, he should pretend that he did not hear anything the girl said. At this moment, he hears the sighs of the heroine. She calls the main character by name and admires the size of her device. The young man turns around in horror. He hears the girl screaming for him to enter her, hears her gasping from the action of the object. The nun screams, saying that she needs to go deeper for complete satisfaction. The main character begins to rush around the porch of the cottage in a panic. He is ashamed that the girl is so loudly engaged in pleasures. Besides, Lunamiria screams his name all the time. A young man would give anything for her to stop doing this and calm down. The main character finds a gap in the window sashes. He decides to watch the heroine through this hole. The girl weakly moves her hands and does not stop moaning. The young man's eyes widen from what he sees in the room. The main character did not expect to find a moaning girl in such a piquant position. The heroine cries and screams that she loves the young man. She tosses around in bed and dreams of Seisama reciprocating her feelings. She satisfies herself and says that she would like a little baby from the main character. The young man was struck by lightning. The main character says that he knows that the nun cannot return to secular life. But the ardent young man cannot suppress this strange feeling when he looks at the bending virgin. A strong girl jumps up and rises high above the ground. She plunges a dagger into her opponent's armor and deals damage to him, scratching the hard shell. In some places, she manages to rip it open. Feeling acute pain, the beast emits a heart-rending roar. At the moment when the girl screams again that she loves the young man, something rises under the towel of the main character. The nun leans back and asks for forgiveness from the young man, whose image she imagines every time during such pleasures. She says that the saint she is protecting is actually a dirty woman who is engaged in lewdness in the room. The girl describes aloud in detail how she imagines the moment of their fusion, says how deep he is inside. The insatiable heroine demands more and more. She calls herself bad and demands that a young man give her himself and a child. The girl bends over, imagining the main character next to her at this moment. The nun touches her body, imagining that a young man is doing it. A series of short moans precedes the most appealing and heartbreaking one that broke out of her. All this time, the main character, without looking up, watches the spectacle unfolding in front of him. The girl approaches the peak moment in her pleasures. She bends her whole body. The object that helps her in this process splashes out of the heroine. This is the same device that the main character discovered. Exhausted, the nun leans back on the bed. The object falls to the floor with a thud and remains lying there. After the discharge, the heroine is breathing heavily. Despite the fact that the girl is naked, warmth instantly spreads through her body. The heroine looks up somewhere with her clouded gaze. Her breathing is gradually returning to normal. The main character continues to watch her through the gap and cannot take his eyes off his girlfriend, who has opened up to him from a completely new side. Lunamaria puts in front of her the very object that she used during her pleasures. The girl folds her hands in front of her, as if she is about to begin evening prayer. Cleansing, she suddenly says in a loud and confident voice. A creature with wings and a halo appears above the heroine. A girl with wings magically picks up an object in front of a nun and cleans mucus and biomaterials from it. The main character closely monitors the behavior of the creature and keeps his sword ready just in case. The young man notices that the monster is not approaching him and assumes that the predator's instinct tells him that it is better to catch up with the victim. The monster injured by the girl falls to the ground with a noise. The beast lets out a roar again, which is capable of terrifying anyone who hears it. The girl also lands on the ground. The heroine cuts by inertia to cut his shell all the way to the tail. The main character is watching what is happening and is incredibly surprised by everything he sees. He is amazed that even in such a situation, the heroine does not forget about prayers. Meanwhile, the girl with wings cleans the device from dirt. She does this with such a noble air and lowers her eyes so meekly that at first glance, it seems as if she is performing some kind of ritual. A magical glow begins to emanate from the cottage. The action moves to the narrow streets of the night city. Lola wanders along one of these streets. She devours a delicious piece of bread with gusto. Suddenly, the heroine's attention is attracted by something slowly approaching her from afar. The main character moves to meet the girl. A girl belonging to the assassins asks a young man a question, asking him if the main character is like her. I decided to go out for a walk on this beautiful evening to enjoy its darkness. The girl's gaze falls on his body below the waist, and she exclaims in surprise, saying that the main character is hard as a stone. She notes that this is visible even through the pants of a young man. He confusedly agrees with her, not wanting to enter into a dialogue. The young man tells his friend that too many events have happened that day. According to his feelings, there was a short circuit in the brain of the main character. It seems to a young man that just a little more and his head will explode from an overabundance of emotions. The main character says that he needs to go to a brothel to at least relieve some tension and refresh himself. The girl looks at his pants with a grin and asks if the brain is pulsing in them by chance. The young man indifferently bypasses the heroine and says that this is all for him if she allows it. The main character is about to leave, but the girl, surprised by his behavior, calls out to him. The heroine says that since the young man is in this place for the first time, he should know one very important thing that he unknowingly missed. The main character asks the girl what he needs to know. The heroine explains to him that there are no brothels where they are. The young man turns to her in horror. He does not know what to do, because the problem in his pants does not allow him to calmly go about his business. The main character rushes to the girl. He calls her by name and shouts the girl to stop. The young man says that Lola, the heroine's name, will not be able to inflict fatal damage to this monster, because her dagger is too small for this. The main character exclaimed in surprise, asking the girl if it was really true that there really wasn't a single brothel where they ended up. The heroine replies that the town where the friends are staying is small. The girl says she has already looked everywhere. She notices the fact that this small town is closest to the Lotus, so it seems that there is practically no demand here. The girl tells the main character that their company will arrive in Lotus tomorrow. A friend advises the young man to be patient a little before arriving there. The young man realizes that he will not be able to calm down after seeing such a scene in the cottage. The main character says with annoyance that at this rate, the next day during the trip, he will have a wild desire to take someone right in the cart. This is the worst prospect that awaits him tomorrow. The young man understands. The girl smiles slyly and pulls her hand towards the boy's trousers. She touches their contents and is surprised to speak positively about the size of the main character's device. The heroine says with a grin that part of the young man is really about to explode. The young man jumps away from her and shouts at her not to touch him with her hands. The heroine turns to the young man and says that, to tell the truth, the main character helped her out a lot today when the monster almost killed the girl. So, as a thank you, she decides to help her friend mute. The action moves into a dark alley between houses. People pass by him calmly, not even imagining what is happening there in a dark corner. The girl works hard with her mouth. Sometimes she breaks away from the main character to catch her breath, and then bends down to his pants again. The young man is breathing heavily and intermittently. With each of her approaches, the protagonist's breathing quickens. At this moment, the girl feels something and turns back. At the same moment, she is terrified that she understands the danger she is in. A heavy tip of a tail with spikes at the end flies straight at the heroine with great speed. Stroking the girl's hair, the ardent young man moans slightly. After squeezing out another exclamation, the young man exclaims, telling his partner how good he is now. The girl does not answer him, continuing to enthusiastically do her job. She brings the main character to a peak point, making such movements that the young man barely restrains himself from screaming from pleasant sensations below the waist. The main character looks down at the heroine and continues to imperiously control her head with his hand. He likes to dominate her. A young man hears the voices of people coming from a busy street. He sees their shadows flickering past the corner where the couple is located. The main character tries his best to restrain his moans so as not to attract people's attention. The girl breaks away from him again, giving herself a short break. She removes the biomaterial from her chin and dives back to the fly of the main character. Apparently, she is changing her technique, because the young man begins to moan a little differently. Finally, the girl finishes, satisfying him, and finally breaks away from the young man, getting up from her knees. She thanks the young man for giving her a treat. The heroine says with admiration that he has an impressive size, and the number of secretions of the young man never ceases to amaze her. The main character replies that she also surprised him quite a lot. The young man praises the girl's amazing technique. The reincarnated porter asks the girl how often she does something similar to men. The heroine asks the young man not to misunderstand her, because she only returned the debt to him. This does not mean that she would make such a gift for anyone. The heroine tells the young man that the director of the company where she used to work was very fond of little girls. She provided similar services to him for various rewards. So it turned out that the girl learned different techniques. The young man replied with longing in his voice that everything was clear to him now. The main character understands that the girl's former boss used his position and the amount of money to satisfy his perverted whims with her help. The blow falls right on target. From such an attack, the girl, being light as a feather, flies away to the side for quite a long distance. She gets scared but gets off with only a small cut on her leg, left by one of the two spikes. Her knife is broken. It's not so strange for another world, the young man decides. He is again convinced of the cruelty of this world when he sees that the principle of survival of the fittest works here, and absolute inequality reigns in society. He gets excited again. The main character stops a girl who is about to leave. The young man offers her to negotiate with him. The young man says he noticed that Loli doesn't have any potions. He asks the girl if this is the case. She replies that it is, because she has never had to be injured or poisoned. The heroine notes that she has enough money. That's what the young man needed. He looks straight into Lola's eyes and says that for an adventurer, having potions is a necessity. The main character explains that their presence or absence often means the difference between life and death. The young man says that he has a lot of them. He continues, saying that if the girl wants, he will even give her a couple for free. The young man offers the girl to pay for it with her body. Rather, to help a friend when he needs it. The main character corrects himself. He asks the girl how she likes the idea. The heroine strikes a pose, but soon decides that the offer is beneficial to her. However, the girl believes that the price for such a service is too low, so she demands that the hero from above also pay for her room. The young man agrees. She doesn't want to wait long, so she suggests going straight to her house to get the job done as soon as possible. It's not far, the heroine says, addressing the young man. The main character happily follows her along the indicated path. The heroes ascend, walk through the dark streets between the houses, and approach the stairs leading to Lola's room. They are climbing this rather steep staircase. The young man looks around, interested in the interior decoration. The main character involuntarily stares at his companion as she slowly takes off her jacket, exposing her beautiful thin shoulders. The young man decides to follow the example of the heroine and also pulls off his coat, remaining in one t-shirt. With the help of his ability, the hero makes his coat evaporate in the air. The girl notes that this is a very useful skill. The biggest problem at the moment for the girl is that due to a change in trajectory due to a tail strike, she flies straight into the open mouth of a monster with many fangs. Terrified, the heroine flies down, unable to resist. The heroine looks at his pants and says out loud that she will have a hard time today. The girl notes that his giant can make even the battered girls from the brothel cry. The main character proudly replies that the girl is right about this. The heroine continues her speech. She says that its width and length are the same as that of the wooden apparatus she saw during the day. She asks the main character if he was in the same shape as him. The young man remembers that he was the same shape as him. The young man remembers that he was the same. The girl freezes in amazement. She notices that the young man told her that this piece of wood was made to order. The heroine asks the main character who ordered this device in this case. The young man is embarrassed and looks away. The girl already vividly represents the joys of the main character among other men of the same kind. She looks at her companion in surprise, but he reads the girl's thoughts in her eyes and immediately begins to justify himself, saying that this is not what the heroine thought at all. The young man clarifies that he is interested in women, so he is absolutely indifferent to men in this regard. The girl replies that, to be honest, she doesn't care. But she notices that even if the main character wanted to add colors to his nightlife, he would not have succeeded, because in this city it is impossible to buy the services of a man. The young man turns to his companion, wanting to say something to her, but his voice stops in mid-sentence. The main character freezes in place when he looks at the girl. The heroine takes off the remnants of another layer of clothing. The girl lowers her eyes, examining her body. In the semi-darkness of the room, her figure looks very feminine. The hero examines every line and every curve. Their eyes meet. The young man smiles lasciviously, anticipating a hot night with his friend. With a slight movement of his hand, he knocks the heroine onto the bed. The girl screams in surprise and waves her arms. She doesn't like that he's taking the initiative. The heroine remains lying on the bed, waiting for the main character to join her. The young man understands what she expects from him and begins to take off his t-shirt. He says he will show her body directly how much he likes Virgos. At the most critical moment, the main character comes to the girl's aid. The young man knocks her out of the flight path. He hugs the heroine and, covering her with his body, protects her from the monster, carefully carrying the girl to a safe distance from him. The girl continues to lie quietly, waiting for the main character to hover over her to start the fun. The young man approaches the heroine, sprawled on the bed. The main character reminds his partner for that night that, as he told her earlier, the girl will have to pay with her body for the potions that the young man promised to give her. The main character bends over the girl very low. He practically touches her face with his own. The young man looks into the bold eyes of the girl lying under him and says that if he does not like their night together, then the deal will be canceled. With the help of the main character, the girl remains without clothes. He examines her body and continues his speech. The young man says that if she thinks she can get out of her situation without trying, then the girl should be ready for failure. The main character says that the girl needs to make up her mind. After these words of the young man, a smile full of cunning and desire spreads on the heroine's face. The girl strokes the main character's cheek. As soon as the ardent young man loses his vigilance, the heroine makes a maneuver and turns him over in such a way that now the main character finds himself lying with his back on the bed. He hadn't expected this. The girl asks the young man what will happen if she empties him completely. The heroine jokingly clarifies whether she will be able to take all the potions of the main character if she copes with her task even several times better than he expects from her. The young man looks up at the beautiful girl from the bottom up and decides not to answer her anything to these words. The main character only admires her figure and is glad that he fell into the hands of an initiative girl who managed to take everything into her own hands, even in such a situation. Meanwhile, the heroine asks the young man not to underestimate her abilities. She warns that in this case it would be more appropriate to say that it is the main character who needs to decide, and not her in any way. The girl takes off the last piece of clothing and tells the main character, warning him that her techniques are so good that even the director of the company in which she previously worked practically begged her on her knees to become his passion. The main character looks back to understand how much he and the girl buried in his shoulder broke away from the pursuit of the monster. With his burden in his arms, the young man jumps from tree to tree, confusing his tracks and running away from the enemy. The young man draws attention to the fact that he had not yet managed to do anything, but his companion was already soaked and was completely ready for action. The main character sees this for the first time, so he looks at the girl with disbelief, but evaluates it as a plus. The heroine bends over her client, making it clear that she is ready to get down to business. The young man curses in surprise and says that the girl really bragged about her skills for a reason, since she is able to get started so quickly. The girl carefully sits on it. She moans with pleasant sensations, trying to produce the proper effect on the main character in order to get the potions. She is able to do it. The girl begins to move gradually, accelerating her movements and rhythm with each thrust. The young man appreciates how deeply the girl sucks and squeezes him, who apparently possesses unsurpassed love techniques. The young man comments on the girl's movements, saying how he likes it. The heroine laughs and replies that the giant of the main character is not so bad either. She hovers over the young man and says that now she will not hold back, even if the main character decides to cry. The girl looks at the young man with a clouded look and calls him her brother. The young man enjoys it. The characters enter into a love confrontation. Their cries can be heard even on the street. The main character holds his partner by the hips, helping her to keep the rhythm. His ragged breathing quickens with pleasure. The girl bends in an arc, trying to give the main character as much pleasure as possible and enjoy this moment of intimacy on her own. The air in the room is heating up. It gets hot and the stuffiness in the room makes it difficult to breathe. The young man eagerly explores the body of his partner, giving her pleasure from various kinds of touches. Periodically, their eyes and lips meet. Both heroes are sweating and getting wet from active movement. The young man changes his position and holds Lola so that it is easier for her to stay in position. They merge in a kiss, and the main character notes the charm of this girl, who completely surrendered herself into his hands. The ardent young man is very warm and pleasant inside her. After making sure that they are far enough away from the monster, the brave young man stops to catch his breath. He descends onto one of the branches of a mighty tree and releases the frightened girl from his arms. She lands on a branch with a bang. The young man notices that the girl masterfully uses her ability to love with her body under the name Mastery of Carnal Pleasures. The main character is incredibly happy that the memory of the nights spent with this hot girl will remain in his memory. The Mastery of Carnal Pleasures is called a skill in which, with the help of magic, a girl with this skill can control everything that concerns her body, and especially sensitive areas. She can even control the possibility of pregnancy. The main character knows that this skill is not easy to master. In order to learn such a technique and master it perfectly, it requires control of one's own body and magical powers, in particular restoration magic. This is a rarity. The young man also knows that this is just a theory known to everyone. In fact, there are many subtleties and nuances in this. The young man understands that this is not the end of it. By focusing magic at the most sensitive points, a heroine with this skill enhances feelings. As soon as the characters merge together, the pleasure of each of them mixes with the other. This ability of the girl is felt by the main character in such a way as if thousands of hundreds of hands are continuously caressing his entire body, which in an instant turned into one sensitive area. Despite his love experience, he is experiencing this for the first time. The girl's level of knowledge and techniques frightens the main character. The young man understands that the heroine's eye is sharpened to look for the weakest points of men in order to influence them. The most important thing is that she is just cosmically good at it. This girl, with her love skills, does things with the young man that the pleasure of her actions increases tenfold. The main character can compare these feelings, delivered to him by Virgo, only with space and heavenly pleasure. The young man reproaches himself for thinking that the girl was a simple gray mouse. Before meeting the heroine, he believed that there were many slutty girls practicing such techniques with such a gorgeous body. But he was very much mistaken. The heroine laughs. She says that the young man not only has a large size, but also knows how to make love quite well. This flatters the main character, who tries his best to match the level of his partner. The young man carefully helps her to sit down and asks how the girl feels after the excitement she has experienced. The heroine replies that she is fine. She adds that she simply did not expect that she would enter into battle like this, and the enemy would be so strong. The girl brings her face closer to the main character's face. She says it's time to teach the young man a lesson. Otherwise, he won't admit that the girl brought him to the peak. The heroine says it's time to take the initiative back into her own hands. She turns the young man over so that he is lying back on the bed again. The main character does not expect such determination from her. The girl says that guys who attack with such enthusiasm very often turn out to be vulnerable. The girl says that this amazing vulnerability manifests itself when young people find themselves bent under a woman. The heroine begins to move actively again. She looks at the main character's face, all the while watching his reaction. The heroine says that the young man wants to reach the peak point of pleasure as soon as possible and finish. She demands that the main character does not hold back and releases everything that he could not release for a long time. The girl wants to remember this moment. Lola screams, demanding that the young man make her a baby. The main character relaxes and releases the seed. The girl screams at him not to stop, and, without changing his position, finish. The heroine emits the last longest and loudest moan. The main character bends over and comes out of the girl. The girlfriend of the main character is breathing heavily and rapidly. She looks at the young man and says that no matter how much she was surprised by this, but if it weren't for her carnal pleasures technique, she would definitely get pregnant. The girl is surprised by the amount of liquid on the bed. The girl smiles and blushes. She tells the young man that it seems that tomorrow he too, like her, will not be able to get back on his feet. She praised the hero for his skill. The heroine says that she's never met guys who could compete with her in skill with such confidence. After such an active pastime, the main character leans back on the pillows. He is completely exhausted and exhausted by the skillful Virgo. The next moment after her words, the young man responds to the heroine so that she does not thank him. Thanks to the ability of automatic recovery, the main character turns back into a beautiful young man, full of strength and energy. She is amazed. The main character turns and looks carefully in the direction from where they just flew in with the injured girl. The young man thinks about it and notices that the monster is no longer trying to chase them, which pleases and worries at the same time. The girl exclaims in surprise and cannot believe that after a second's respite, the main character is aroused again. The young man enthusiastically goes to the heroine and offers her to fight in the Battle of Love Joys in the second round. The girl waves her hands and asks the main character to let her at least take a breath after the first time. He asks her where she went. The main character asks if the girl really thinks she can get his entire collection of potions by messing with a young man for just one night. The young man says that if the heroine really thinks so, then they should continue this. The moon, which illuminated the small town all night, is replaced in the morning by a brightly shining disk of the sun. The road along which the heroes are heading continues its path through the forest and mountainous terrain. A large city in the form of a fortress can be seen on the horizon. Coming closer, the friends examine a large gate with a massive grill. After a sleepless night, Lola doesn't look her best. She can barely walk and slows down the whole group. The main character, on the contrary, looks very cheerful and rested after a night out. The young man exclaims with joy and relief that his group has finally reached the city of Lotus. The sorceress Scarlet is very surprised and notices the fact that the city is literally teeming with adventurers like them. Lola is upset when she hears the perky voice of the main character. She sarcastically notes that the young man speaks very calmly about this. The girl grumbles about the fact that the hero is just a porter. The young man sighs and says that everything is not as she thinks. The main character admits that he is very surprised here, because in fact, the young man has not yet met girls who would willingly like to stay with him. The young man hands the heroine a potion and says that they worked together yesterday. The heroine takes the vials of potion given to her and says that what the main character saw yesterday is only part of what she is actually capable of. The girl grins and warns that only the young man should not lose his vigilance. The brave young man prepares for the upcoming fight, making sure that the sword is conveniently placed in his hand. The main character decides that his opponent must be very confident in his abilities, since he is in no hurry to immediately attack the young man. At this moment, there is a soft moan from the girl who has been sitting next to him all this time. The exhausted heroine sweats and begins to breathe heavily. Apparently, she is in severe pain, as the cut on her leg begins to make itself felt. Meanwhile, the sorceress Scarlet looks around and examines the people around them. The girl notices that quite a lot of strong-looking adventurers have gathered around. This coincidence plays into the hands of the heroes of this company. The heroine looks at everyone and thinks about it. So much for the dungeon city. She grins in her thoughts. The girl understands that if you try and win as part of some strong team, you can stay in it forever. The heroine pays attention to the main character with his newly minted passion. The girl is surprised that the team members got along so quickly. She's trying to figure out if it was because they were fighting with the monster, or if it was something else. The girl turns to the nun and asks Lunamiria what is wrong with their team members. However, the nun does not answer the sorceress. She just looks after her lover Sei, who is walking away arm in arm with another girl from the team. The sorceress understands everything without words. She glares at the main character, not understanding how you can be such a ladies' man. Meanwhile, the young man complains that all the adventurers crowded around the window for the registration of adventurers. The main character turns to the members of his team and offers them a snack somewhere. The young man glances at Lunamiria and asks the girl with a smile what she will say to this. The nun enthusiastically agrees to this wonderful idea. The heroes head to the nearest diner. Each of the travelers came to Lotus to take an advanced training exam, because this is their only opportunity to so easily get a higher rank in the Adventurer Association. Iron, bronze, silver, and gold grades. Adventurers earn their status and political influence depending on the rank they belong to. If a person has a gold level, then they will communicate with this hero as if he were an aristocrat. Upgrading skills depends on how much benefit you bring to the association, so adventurers go deeper into the dungeons to defeat the main boss. They can also take on urgent orders and earn achievements in this way. As a rule, it can take several years for even an experienced adventurer to rise in rank, which is not surprising. The young man notices that the girl does not look good. The main character finds a piece of cloth in order to tighten her leg and stop the blood. He says that the heroine's condition is like being poisoned by a weak poison injected from a monster's thorn. The city of Lotus, located on the territory of Lincoln, is called the Bronze Rank Dungeon City, as the requirements for achieving it are strict. Here, all adventurers are provided with specific requirements that are clearly formulated. One of them is to defeat powerful magical creatures that live in the territory of the Lotus. By doing this, you can upgrade to the bronze rank. That is why many people take on too much. Newcomers are dying en masse right here. Each of the heroes who arrived at the Lotus is one of the newcomers. The main character, like his companions, is confident that he will reach the bronze rank and become a strong adventurer, who will be able to adapt and live freely in this harsh world. A caring young man bandages the injured heroine's leg. She thanks him for his help. The young man says that his girlfriend, named Lunamaria, is a nun. He assumes that Na can heal the girl's wound with the help of sacred magic. There is a girl standing on the ground under a tree. She shouts at the main character, addressing him by name. The young man picks up the wounded heroine and answers the girl that she is just in time. He asks Lunamiria if the nun can help them. While he is waiting for an answer, a lot of thoughts come to his mind about the current situation. He comes to the conclusion that from the very beginning, he understood that something was wrong with this strange monster, and it was more dangerous than it might seem at first glance. The sorceress whom the young man was supposed to protect was also too confident in her magical abilities. However, the main character can't figure out why no one noticed the giant monster wandering through the forest all this time. The main character analyzes the abilities of his opponent and comes to the conclusion that the many legs along the monster's torso help the monster move quickly and accelerate instantly. This significantly reduces the chances of survival for his victim. His forehead and jaw are covered with a special compound. The young man reflects, clutching the girl sitting in his arms. The main character comes up with the ingenious idea that if a bully like this monster decided to move around and sneak up on his target unnoticed, then she would have one very effective way to do it. Suddenly, he freezes in horror. The young man understands that in this case, the bully would attack from under the ground, taking advantage of the surprise effect. At the same moment when this thought comes to the main character's head, a monster appears from the ground, trying to swallow the heroes. The young man gets tired of waiting for his opponent to go on an active offensive and decides to act first. He tells himself that he doesn't care who goes first, so the main character will take on this task. The main character jumps up with all his might to dodge the enemy's attack. He is straining, trying not to fall into the jaws of a dangerous predator that follows him out of the ground with lightning speed. The monster tears up the earth and reaches for the sky. Due to its length, the monster rises high above the forest and rushes after the dodging youth. One of the blades with which it tore the ground suddenly cracks, making a characteristic crunch. Steam billows from the monster. Lightning sparkles around. The main character flies back, still continuing to hug the injured girl. The young man assesses the situation with annoyance and tells himself that the monster almost touched them with its blades. He appeared too abruptly. The nun, who unwittingly witnessed this scene, is very scared for the main character and his companion. Lunamiria screams in horror at her friend, calling him by name to make sure that he is all right after the monster attack. The main character turns around at the call of his friend and discovers that a monster is approaching her from behind. A terrified young man screams at the nun Lunamiria to turn around and be ready for the monster's attack. A chill runs down the girl's back, chilling her to the bone. The heroine is horrified, realizing that a monster is flying right at her, aiming to attack a fragile and defenseless at first glance nun. The young man lands on the ground and seats his companion in a safe place near the roots of a sprawling tree. After taking precautions, the main character turns his gaze towards Lunamiria and shouts for her to run faster. Suddenly, the expression on the brave young man's face changes dramatically. He looks at the nun and reads in her gaze that the girl does not intend to flee. She confidently and proudly looks at the main character with her mischievous eyes and makes it clear to him that she will not be afraid. The girl whips out her bat-shaped weapon and stands in a combat readiness pose. She turns to the monster approaching her and tells it to attack her, because the heroine is ready to repel all his attacks, no matter how difficult they may be. The girl raises her weapon, which begins to glow in her hands, illuminating everything around, and puts it in front of her. The young man says that he is currently using the magic injection technique. He holds his sword out in front of him and points it at the opponent. With this technique, the young man is going to deliver a crushing blow to his enemy. The girl closely monitors the actions of the enemy, reading his intentions. She holds the bat at the ready so that as soon as he gets within striking distance, she can begin to repel his attacks. In a frenzy, Lunamiria rushes towards him. The nun shouts at her opponent not to dare touch her companion, Sayasama, because otherwise, he will have to deal with her. The heroine's weapon begins to emit sparkling lightning. As soon as the rivals approach each other at a sufficiently close distance, the girl uses her bat. She hits a dangerous monster with all the strength she has. Her blow is so strong that his head is thrown back. The main character breaks away from the place where he stood earlier and runs to the nun. A brave young man wants, if anything, to help his girlfriend in the fight against a terrible monster. The young man looks very focused, as he is extremely determined. The main character moves very quickly and deftly, raising clouds of dust under his feet. He concentrates all available energy in his feet and climbs up the monster's torso directly to its head to deliver his crushing blow. The young man rises to the very head of the monster and jumps up to reach it and make an attack. A brave young man appears near the monster so unexpectedly that the monster does not notice him at first. He doesn't expect to see a hero in any way. The agile guy collects his future weapons on the fly. He needs to do this as quickly as possible in order to be able to strike the enemy before he takes any action. The last detached part makes a clicking sound. When finished with the assembly, the main character abruptly approaches the monster. With one swing of a homemade axe, the young man cuts off one of the two blades attached to the monster's head. The monster emits its terrible and frightening roar. The monster, continuing to wheeze and make soul-chilling sounds, loses its orientation in space. He opens his mouth wide and, deprived of the opportunity to fight, rushes down, falling straight to the ground. The main character bounces off a falling monster. The young man solemnly throws his hatchet into the air and tells Lunamiria in a victorious voice that this attack, in his opinion, was very well executed, since it had such an effect. The monster rushes at the main character. He's baring his fanged mouth. The whole appearance of the terrible monster expresses its ferocity and ruthlessness. The guy's blow falls directly into his armored skull, from which the monster emits a menacing and displeased growl. The attentive young man took a closer look at the weapon in his girlfriend's hands. He noted for himself its striking color and texture, saying that he could assume that this instrument was made of a material called red iron. He notes that, although red iron is softer than usual, it has better conductivity for magic. It is not surprising that his strength increases significantly, let the moon of the world pass its magic through him. However, he did not expect such power. The main character reflects on the fact that the monster they are fighting can safely break through solid ground. The young man is surprised that, with such skills, the nun's wand easily pierced the outer shell of the beast's shell. The young man looks fervently at his girlfriend and warns her that the most interesting thing will begin from this moment. The main character smiles slyly and apologizes in advance to her for his behavior, saying that from now on he will definitely show off. At this moment, the monster's carcass falls down. The monster rolls across the ground and raises clouds of dust from it. The monster throws the nun aside. She flies off some distance and hits the trunk of a tree. She gasps at the unexpected landing. Lunamiria winces and moans from the unpleasant pain in her back. At the same moment, her attention is attracted by a monster that looms over her, aiming to attack the defenseless girl again. He lets out a low growl and anticipates pouncing on his prey. The heroine looks at him in fright, because she realizes that she has fallen into a trap. "No!" she exclaims in horror. The girl can't believe that the monster is still alive, despite all the damage that his comrades inflicted on him during the battle. Lunamiria looks for her weapon with her eyes in order to somehow protect herself from the monster. She realizes that the rod has been left aside and she cannot reach it in any way. At this time, the monster hovers over her in the air. The monster glares at the heroine with its predatory gaze. He's grinning, ready to attack the girl at any moment. In an instant, he finds himself next to the heroine. The monster opens its huge mouth to swallow the girl. Lunamiria staggers back and screams at him not to do it. The ferocious monster rises on its hind legs and looms over the main character, who looks very small and defenseless in comparison. In fact, the young man is very brave, as he continues the fight and does not even think about retreating. The heroine, being a deeply religious person, closes her eyes and begins to pray to God for help and salvation. Her whole life flies before the nun's eyes. The girl decides that this is the end, and prepares to say goodbye to life in the mouth of a terrible monster. At the same moment, the main character appears between the nun and the monster, who came from somewhere out of thin air. It was as if the Lord had heard the girl's pleas. The young man covers the frightened girlfriend with his strong body, ready to protect her from the beast at any cost. The girl looks admiringly at her defender. Her eyes are shining with happiness, because the heroine was already ready to accept her terrible fate. She exclaims, addressing the main character by name. Seisama, that's the name of the young man, is preparing to repel the monster's attack at this time. The brave young man frowns to focus all his attention and strength on the impending blow. Having assumed the necessary posture for the fight, the young man applies one of the techniques he has studied. With her help, the main character creates a field with a vortex near him. At the same moment, a blade previously cut off from the monster flies up to the young man. It lands on the ground with a thud, stopping near the main character who attracted it. A resourceful young man approaches him and takes hold of the edge of a knife-sharp blade. The young man takes aim to make a long-awaited attack and defeat the enemy who bothered him, who already caused too much trouble. After waiting for the monster to approach the required distance, the main character throws this knife at his opponent, twisting it in the air as if it were a shuriken. The blade flies straight at the target and crunches through it. The blade continues to fly along a predetermined trajectory in such a way that the monster splits into two parts. The main character continues to stand in a position of combat readiness. The young man is watching with interest how his lightning-fast and rather well-thought-out attack works successfully in such difficult conditions. The young man's gaze falls on the weapon, which he continues to hold tightly in his hand. The main character discovers that his sword has broken on the strong armor of the monster. The young man is very surprised, as he did not expect to be left without weapons in battle. The brave young man looks into the distance and does not take his eyes off the monster divided into several parts. A serious guy at this moment looks very stern and courageous. Lunamiria looks at the main character with eyes full of admiration and gratitude for the fact that he did not leave her and came to her rescue at the most dangerous moment. The girl realizes that the young man risked his life when he saved her from the monster. She turns to Seiyo-sama, who at this time continues to look thoughtfully at his purely done work. The girl says she thought he was the one. She turns her gaze to the calm forest that stretches behind the young man. As a child, Lunamiria loved to read a story called The Tale of the Monastic Journey of the Holy Virgin. At any free moment, the girl picked up this book and sat down to read it over and over again until she got bored. This story told readers about the pilgrimage of a certain holy virgin. According to the plot of this book, the young saint went on a journey to various places. She did this in order to heal all the poor and punish all sinners on earth. The heroine read about how the saint had faced difficulties countless times. However, each time all these difficulties were resolved in an instant, when a man came to the aid of the main character of the book. He protected her from pain. At the end of the work, it turned out that this young man was actually an apostle from God. He was sent by the Lord himself to guide the saint on the true path when she wanders the world in search of those whom she needs to heal. This was the story of the heroes of the book read by the nun many times. The young man, named Sei, reminded her very much of the man in the book. The girl decided that he was almost like an apostle sent to her by God. She had always admired this character from the book. The main character stands triumphantly in front of the monster divided into two parts. The young man is pleased and proud that he managed to defeat such a dangerous beast. Steam billows from the carcass of the bloody monster, covering everything around with its white veil. The girl continues to stare at him in amazement. The young man turns to her and with a sly smile on his face asks the heroine if she is all right. He looks very charming, especially after he saved a girl from a terrible death. The reincarnated porter curses. The young man continues to pretend as if nothing had happened and bravely looks into the eyes of his opponent. The main character realizes that he will have to hold out in this position for some more time in order to win. The heroine's cheeks are covered with a thick blush. She looks at her savior with a languid gaze. The girl is so lost and confused by his question that she does not find anything that she could answer him. She only softly and tenderly pronounces the name of Seiyo-sama. A monster divided in half continues to hover over the heroes. In this form, he looks very intimidating and ferocious. The girl is frightened by the sight of the monster. The heroine looks at its contours, and it seems to her that the monster is still not defeated to the end. She begins to scream and ask the main character if this monster is still alive, since his body has not yet fallen down. Both characters look closely at the carcass of a huge insect. Steam continues to fall from its depths, and some unknown sounds are heard. According to the feelings that the characters experience at this moment, only the calm before the terrible storm can be compared. Suddenly, an explosion is heard and the silhouettes of the heroes stand out in a flash of bright light. The mushroom rises from the explosion, and a loud sound like a pop scares away all the birds in the vicinity. They rise above the forest and fly away. A girl appears out of nowhere behind the surprised heroes. The sorceress laughs jerkily, watching the reaction of the young people. The girl blushes with delight and gloatingly asks, addressing the monster, how this terrible insect is now that they have defeated it. Sei and Lunamiria turn towards the heroine. She does not stop laughing, on the contrary. Her laughter becomes even louder and gloating. The characters look at the girl with surprised eyes. The faces of the young man and the girl express fatigue and misunderstanding. Meanwhile, a cart drawn by two horses is moving through the forest. Some warrior leans his foot on one of the monsters sprawled in the clearing. Apparently, this monster has been defeated, as it does not move and does not show any signs of life. The hero who stepped on him rejoices that he and his comrades defeated all the monsters they met on the way. His friend cheers with all his might, showing with all his appearance how happy he is about this event. The heroes went to the exam for advanced training of adventurers to raise their rank, but first they need to register with the guild as new adventurers. The nun of the Holy Church and the hired killer received all the necessary documents that needed to be filled out, and under the strict supervision of Scarlet and the Observer, they entered all the data. Now all that remains is to hand over the papers, go through further registration procedures, and you can proudly wear the title of an adventurer. Say, Runamelia and Scarlet look in surprise at such a sudden disappearance of their friend, not understanding how she disappeared so easily. For a nun, such a skill is considered something amazing. She had never seen such a thing before. The sorceress explains that their friend used an ability to hide her presence. Then the examiner realizes that there is an assassin in front of him, and he also understood the peculiarity of this skill. It might have been too late for another person, but not for an old man with so much experience. Zophie appears in the shadow of the man, resolutely clutching the hilt of her dagger. She gets closer, preparing to quietly and imperceptibly hit the old man in the side or belly. Gripping the knife tighter, she leans forward with force. But, unfortunately, the girl herself, the man saw through her plan. Pulling out his sword, he knocks the dagger out of Zophie's hands in one deft movement, and almost knocks her down, saying that her trick is not so effective in an open area like an arena. The assassin rolls his eyes in displeasure, acknowledging his unsuccessful attempt to attack. Meanwhile, the old man picks up a dagger flying in the air and examines it closely, squinting at both the blade and the hilt from all sides. Turning his head towards the girl, he says that Zophie could have used throwing techniques. But the assassin says that after she left the squad, her old colleagues took away all the throwing equipment she had, leaving only one weapon, a dagger, which the man now holds in his hand. Sighing, the old man hands the weapon back to the girl, informing her that she failed the exam, at least this time. The examiner advises her to buy better weapons next time and combine long-range equipment with nearby ones. Unfortunately, this turns out to be another failure, which, no matter how much I would like to, I will have to admit. The porter, the nun, and the sorceress look surprised and annoyed, realizing that most likely none of them will be able to go further. But the sorceress Scarlet Andrinard is gathering her strength, because nothing is clear yet. She is considered the best student in her class at the Royal School of Magic, and it is definitely not her style to get upset about this, to doubt her abilities. Gripping her magic wand tightly, the girl takes a few steps forward, announcing that she will be next. Her gaze is resolute and focused. The girl's dress is fluttering in the wind, and the sleeves are rolled up. It's possible that she has a certain strategy up her sleeve. After that, the registrar of the Adventurers Guild guides the young man through the corridors of the building, through a couple of courtyards, and eventually he finds himself with her in a small room, in the center of which there's a table with a map and many shelves with books. The man asks the girl to demonstrate her abilities, to show what she's capable of, while she walks around him in a circle and examines the place, choosing the best position. Orders make Scarlet angry. She asks not to tell the old man what to do, because it's not his concern. Chuckling, the sorceress still finds a suitable place from which she can start casting her spell, and before the fight she turns to the examiner, asking not to blame her if he gets hurt. She is confident in her abilities, as well as in the fact that she will cope better than the rest of those present in the arena before her. The crystal at the top of the wand lights up with a bright light. Bright rays appear around it, illuminating the entire area. The girl pulls her weapon a little higher, whispering some kind of spell. At this moment, Zophie and Runamelia look at them in surprise, as Scarlet herself once looked at them. They were slightly pinned to the seat of the podium due to a sharp gust of wind, stretching her wand higher and clasping it with both hands. The sorceress does not look at how swirls, strong gusts of air and bright rays form around the crystal, but stands in a fighting stance, ready to attack the old man. The spectators in the stands silently watch as the flames and wind cover the entire arena, but do not try to cover their eyes and do not scream, as was the case, for example, with the nun. They are interested. They cannot take their eyes off the picture that unfolded before their eyes. The examiner stands steadfastly, noting only how skillfully the girl is able to control her magic. Not everyone is capable of this, and it's really impressive. A huge fireball rises above the arena, shining and showering heat all around. Without responding to the praise, since she does not need it, Scarlet, being confident in her advantage, exhales through her mouth and pronounces a spell that she is ready to use. A huge fireball is under her control. She spares no effort, gathering all the energy in one place. Controlling the created ball through the wand, the young sorceress raises it higher, directing her gaze at the old man. It seems that the magic clot collected in one place may soon break, but in the hands of the girl there is an incredible power, thanks to which she is able to control it. Strengthening her ball and adding small lumps of fire around it, looking more like flying meteorites, she directs them with a wand at the calmly standing old man. Seeing all this in front of him, he does not even try to fight or run, just waits for the right moment. The girl explains that the place they are currently in is an archive, accessible only to adventurers in the guild. Ordinary people are not allowed to enter here, and not every adventurer has the right to enter this place. Following the small fireballs, a huge one created earlier flies in the same way. The girl also controls him with the help of a rod, and now he is not in the sky, but is rapidly flying at the man. The examiner meets face to face with the strongest magic and the best sorceress of the academy. On the left and right, on the sides, small balls fly at him, leaving behind a trail of fire, and in the center a large ball, blinding and enveloping with its heat. The spectators in the stands are both amazed and sympathetic to the examiner, realizing that he definitely cannot dodge such an attack as it was before. The men sitting in front shout that the girl is not holding back, and this simply amazes them. One of the girls says that this huge ball is crazy and will hit everything in its field of vision. In the eyes of Scarlet herself, devils are dancing with joy. She is completely confident in her abilities. It is not for nothing that she is considered the best and incomparable at the academy. Shouting furiously that the man has nowhere to run now, she watches the shells fly at him and does not even feel a drop of pity for him. The old man does not respond to this, just quietly grunts and clicks his sword hidden in his belt, pulling it out of its scabbard. He abruptly pulls out his weapon and makes a swing, cutting through the air with incredible speed. In an instant, the man deflects the attack of one of the projectiles flying at him with the sword and takes a step forward while the fireball flies to the back of the field, hitting loudly and leaving behind clouds of black smoke and sparks flying across the entire area of the arena. Sei is not surprised. In his head, he notes that wooden training swords should not be used against such powerful attacks because they simply will not stand up. They will immediately break, and after the owner of such a weapon himself will be injured. The trick is to imbue the sword with magic before striking, and if you barely touch it with the blade of a fireball and use this fleeting touch to set a direction for it, then you can deflect the blow from yourself and redirect it to any other point along the trajectory chosen earlier. The man reflects each of the fireballs flying at him, manages to touch each with his sword, and direct the blow in a completely different direction so that the balls could not touch both him and those sitting in the stands of the arena. The audience exclaims with delight that what happened is simply impossible and hard to believe, because the old man coped with the attack in just a couple of strokes. But someone from the crowd exclaims that the examiner cuts the balls into pieces faster than everyone present in the arena can see. According to the register, the map that is on the table shows the habitat of monsters, but you cannot take it with you. You are allowed to use it only inside the walls of the archive. Thanks to the map, you can learn a little more information that may be useful in the future and also gain an advantage in knowledge. One of the spectators shouts that a huge ball is flying at the old man right from above, and he needs to be careful. Then the man plunges his sword into the stone slab with all his strength and lifts it, then quickly touches the fireball with the same slab and reflects the blow. The slab soars up with a sword attached to it, holding the same huge fireball. The old man did not reflect this blow, because it would not be possible to take the ball to some other place, so that none of those gathered to look at the test would be injured. With a cry of surprise, Scarlet looks at how the last ball explodes in the sky, leaving behind thick black smoke and particles from the stone slab on which it was located. This meant that the girl did not pass the exam, because the old man was not injured. So, it seemed to the sorceress. When the smoke clears, the man finds himself next to Scarlet, praising her for such outstanding magical skills. Especially for such a young person, her fighting ability, strategy, and courage are incredibly strong. All aspects are high, despite the age of the enchantress. Finally, the old man throws out that the girl coped with the task and passed the test, so far the only one who spoke in front of him today. Scarlet is at a dead end, unable to say a word right now, only clutching her weapon tighter in her hands. Finally moving away from the stupor into which she fell after the service and after the words of the examiner, the enchantress calls the old man an abnormal psycho, while the crowd cheers, rejoicing for Scarlet for her passing the test. Zoffy and Runamelia praise the girl, congratulate her on passing because she did a great job. Scarlet-san, as the nun says, was not expected to do anything else, because she is the best student and just a wonderful magician. He waves his hand at the smoke that has formed, grumbling with displeasure that there is such a fuss around because of the most ordinary dough. Now it's Sei's turn. He's the next one to be tested, and the last of today's applicants. He's a little uncomfortable because everyone is watching, but he tries to reject all his superfluous thoughts by entering the battlefield. The examiner is about to start testing the young man when he suddenly notices a porter's badge on his chest. This causes him a slight grin in surprise, and now the people gathered in the stands know about it. All the viewers laugh at the young man because he is a simple guy whose task is to carry someone else's luggage. They do not know why such a weakling wants to try to get to the bronze rank, and consider his behavior a ridiculous and stupid joke. The registrar also says that the Lotus Maze is a flat one-story maze, but it is so huge that even in the guild, no one knows its real size. Of course, this place was investigated, but no one could understand even the approximate scale. Only the boy's companions support him. The assassin and the sorceress look around the stands with displeasure, and Runamelia looks with admiring eyes at the young man, folding her hands as if in prayer. She hopes for his victory and further obtaining a new bronze rank. Sighing, Sei asks if the old man is so surprised that a porter like him wants to get a bronze rank. But the man shakes his head, saying that the main character's judgments are wrong, and he is very mistaken. The examiner was surprised not that the porter wanted to get a bronze rank for himself, but that a man like Sei was this very porter. Adjusting his gloves, the guy says nothing to this, just grunts and prepares to take part in the decisive battle. Laughter spreads through the stands. If earlier the audience looked with admiration and even with some horror at the girls, were afraid of their strength and recognized their power. Now, an ordinary porter who wants to show himself causes only ridicule and speculation that what is happening may be a joke. The fat old man will repeat that he is surprised how a man like Sei can be a porter. He makes these conclusions for a reason. Yes, the examiner does not have any assessment skill. He does not have such an ability. But there is something better than that. Adjusting his glasses, which were sleeping closer to the tip of his nose, the man reports that veterans like him have developed a highly acute instinct for assessing the strength of the enemy. The guy is silently watching. Now is not the time for talking. He is setting himself up for the upcoming battle. Grunting, the porter pulls a sword from his belt, clutching the scabbard with one hand and the hilt with the other, saying that he would appreciate the final verdict of the examiner after the test. The stands are filled with loud laughter again. Especially smart spectators mock the guy. They say that the porter's attempts to show his sword skills do not cause anything but ridicule. Each of them believes that just 3 seconds and he will already be kissing the ground with himself. His palms tighten around the hilt of the sword. He tries not to react in any way to outright provocations from people who are sitting and calling him a travois. Now they say that he lost his mind in one of the pockets. He is sure that he will wipe their noses and no one else will dare to speak like that. While all these spectators in the arena continue to mock and call the guy names, he imbued his sword with magic. The strongest energy was concentrated in his hands, which he transferred to his weapon and imbued it. The sword itself shines brightly. A trail of fire rises along it. Despite the fact that there is no sun in the maze, the sky is exactly the same brightness as on the surface. It gets dark there at the same time as the sun sets outside, so there is time to prepare for the night. The only difference is a lot of monsters and not the best environment for survival. The man looks closely at the porter, thinking that usually people like him are not particularly strong in magic and mana control, but the young man is different from the rest. The boy achieves a high level of enhancement magic by accurately and quickly applying a minimum amount of mana, and this skill, according to the examiner, is simply incredible. Sei asks a rhetorical question, whether this is enough to pass the test. His gaze is turned towards the fat man, and his smile seems a little sinister. The old man just watches him with a grin. One of the guards throws a new sword to the examiner, because the last one could not stand the battle with Scarlet and was broken. Catching the scabbard with one hand and not even looking, the man takes a fighting stance and says the last words before the fight. Gripping the hilt of the sword tightly and securing the scabbard to his belt, the old man says that the porter's mana control and his enhancement magic are truly impressive. But this alone will not be enough to defeat monsters in the future, and most likely pass the test too. A young man and an old man cross swords before a fight. He puts one foot forward and keeps his hand on his belt. The examiner clenches his palm into a fist and holds it behind his back, saying that he is ready to see what the young man is capable of. And at this moment, the fight itself begins. More and more people are gathering around the arena. They stand at the entrance, whispering to each other, asking each other what is going on, whether there is a fight on the site. The young man's companions notice that the arena is getting even more crowded than before, and hope that this will not interfere with the guy. Gritting his teeth, the young man thinks that it is better now not to reveal his abilities in front of the crowd, so he will have to try better. With his lips alone, the guy whispers a quiet, "Let's start," and now all his thoughts are occupied only with the fight and the desire to get his rank. The young man raises his sword and tries to attack head-on, points the weapon at the examiner, but he parries the blow, despite all the force with which the guy hits. The sword is covered with a powerful and bright glow, showing all the power. The old man manages to jump aside so as not to take the blow. Having tuned in more decisively, the boy hits so that the examiner stumbles slightly and almost falls, but another new swing of the sword from the young man manages to block so as not to be hit. Holding the hilt of the sword with one hand, the boy directs his gaze clearly at the old man. He takes a step back and a couple more swings, but the examiner blocks each of them, while not losing his balance and standing firmly on his feet. The young man is interested in what is the risk of being attacked during a rest stop, and then the girl points her finger at the circles indicating safe zones. For hundreds of years, adventurers have been sprinkling holy water in these places, which makes it much harder for monsters to approach. Sei has a serious expression on his face, which indicates his determination and willingness to go to the end. The guy, after another blow and parry from the old man, flies back a little. He runs his sword along the ground, leaving sparks and dust particles behind him, and leans on one knee and on the palm of his hand. Quickly getting to his feet, the young man looks around, trying to build an accurate plan in his head and understand where he should hit, from which side to approach, because a direct attack, as the young man has already realized, does not work, and, unfortunately, it will not help him win this battle. Quickly flying up to the old man, the young man hits closer to the right side of his torso with one swing, and looks to see if it is hit. But the examiner stops a series of blows. Each of them blocks, while not even looking at the trying guy. At the same moment, the old man tries to strike back, but the young man slips across the field on his knees and bends his head back, managing to dodge the blow. If the sword were sharp, it would have no problem injuring the neck or head. After quickly getting his bearings, the guy gets back into a fighting position and this time holds the handle of the gun closer to his face. With one precise blow, he makes a swing from the left side, but the man predicts this moment, stepping aside and dodging. After crossing swords again, the sound of metal is heard, and this time the examiner's blow is much stronger. If before he had only dodged, now he goes on the offensive and counterattacks. From such power, the boy flies away much stronger than before, and at the same moment an old man runs up to him, striking. But this one reflects him, and looks at him with a look full of anger. This swing game is starting to annoy him. He intends to win, and no one will stop him. The sword flies out of the guy's hands at this moment. He quickly runs to another part of the arena, while the examiner prepares to attack again. The man takes a step forward and runs up to the main character again, but he finds his sword, seizing a weapon at the last moment. He deflects the old man's blow, and even manages to parry. He swings his weapon from the head and backhands the examiner's sword, after which he begins to move towards him at a rapid pace. Swinging his weapon from side to side, left and right, the young man comes up with a new plan. He doesn't just make the old man lower his sword and shorten his strokes. Choosing the right moment, the porter makes a dash forward. Dust and sparkling lightning form under his foot. Sei notices that the map is divided into 6 parts, and the guild registrar confirms his earlier thoughts out loud. An old scroll with the map shows the territories of the 5 bosses and the maze master. Flying up to the old man at all speeds, the young man runs behind him and tries to hit from this point, but the man even blocks his blow, saying that he hits perfectly, powerfully, and accurately on target. But the main problem is that his eyes betray all his intentions. This further inflames the young man. He swings his leg in flight with all his anger and stupidity and hits the old man on the left side of his face. But he manages to substitute his free hand so as not to get in the face, giving only a dry, not bad, for the active actions of the boy. With the last of his strength and with heavy breathing, the young man clutches a sword in his hand and wipes the sweat from his face. His gaze is directed at the old man. He no longer knows which side to approach in order to finally touch him at least a little and get his long-awaited bronze rank. Brandishing a sword in his hand, the old man grunts, saying that he is not even sweating and is still relaxed. He suggests that the guy forget about his surroundings and attack with all his might, because when the old man opens up on purpose, the young man is noticeably doubtful, and this is visible only in a fraction of a second. The examiner continues to say that this is a very bad habit, which should be worked on in the future and get rid of it, because the porter definitely has something that others do not have, an ace hidden up his sleeve. The young man attacks again while the old man continues to lead a monologue, and this was a mistake, because the man not only manages to repel the attack, but also understands one important thing. The blows of the young man are very chaotic and meaningless. 7 times, as the examiner noticed, this one changes the center of gravity for the attack, and this is clearly unnecessary. This is what he does because, according to the old man, the young man is not confident in his abilities and next actions. No matter how he shows the opposite, one swing is enough for the porter to fall back to the ground and lose coordination in his actions. Meanwhile, the man continues to say that he sees how Sei has several plans at once to defeat him. The old man asks if he is right in his judgments, but that is more a rhetorical question. The porter really imagines in his thoughts how he will defeat the old man, how he will deal him a decisive swing with his sword. All these images in front of my eyes are interrupted by another challenge coming from the old man's mouth. The tribunes and companions of the young man are in shock. The audience is surprised that that guy, meaning Sei, hasn't blown away yet, and the fight feels like it's been going on forever. The girls notice how the examiner is getting more serious. This fight is different from all the previous ones. While the young man continues to study the books and papers provided to him, the girl tells him that the test for increasing the bronze rank in the Lotus is divided into 2 stages. The first is practice. To pass it, you need to fight with the guild examiner and prove your bronze rank skills. The old man notes that the guy's elegant in using a sword, and this suggests to the examiner that he was born into a noble family or a knightly one. The young man's eyes widen in surprise, and this conclusion unsettles the young man. Pressing hard on the sword, the man continues to draw conclusions about the guy, about his origin. With his free hand, he runs along the blade of the sword, saying that the bearer has an exquisite sword made of real silver alloy. Such a design is unique among the nobility of Umbarius, and therefore the examiner dares to assume that the weapon is quite expensive. The old man does not let up. He wonders how such a weapon fell into the hands of a young man from a nobleman to a porter. And if this is true, then the man has no words left. Unpleasant memories pop up in Sei's head, and so that the examiner does not continue to stir up long-forgotten things in his memory, the guy strikes again. Moving the sword from one hand to the other, the young man hits someone else's sword. The guy puts his foot forward and makes a sharp swing. Apparently, the man's words awaken rage in him. Otherwise, there is no way to explain the fact that now the young man was able to slightly touch the examiner and cut off a couple of hair with a blade. The stands are cheering, and now, instead of ridicule, there are exclamations of surprise. One of the men shouts that the porter almost hit. There was just a little bit left. The girl with 2 tails screams, saying what an incredible speed the boy has, and the other girl does not understand how the sword evaporated from the young man's left hand. There is more to the main character than a desire to get a bronze rank. Now the intention to kill is raging in him, because there is no choice and he will have to fight to the end. Stretching his shoulder, Sei grabs the sword in his hand and is about to deliver the last blow, when suddenly, everything ends. The examiner lowers his weapon, puts the sword back in the scabbard, and congratulates the young man, because he was able to pass the test. The frown is replaced by a kind smile, and the eyebrows are not reduced to the bridge of the nose, but raised upwards, which shows the positive attitude of the old man. Frozen in one position for a short time, the young man does not believe the words he has heard. He still holds the sword while the stands cheerfully shout and congratulate the boy for passing on. Standing up, he shakes his head while the examiner continues to have a dialogue with him. According to his feelings, the strength of the porter has exceeded all previously built expectations, but the boy is not happy about it so much. It seems to him that the old man easily bypassed him. There is nothing special here, but how can the main character be wrong? Because in fact this is not true, and the examiner all this time, behind the external calm and mask of indifference, hid a real relentless storm inside himself, panic. The second stage is considered to be a submission test. You need to create a team and defeat the maze master. However, before that, it is necessary to defeat the boss of each area. The old man hopes that what happened today in this arena will be a valuable experience for the porter in the future, and having anticipated his question, the examiner says that he does not stick his nose into other people's secrets, so there is nothing to worry about. Exhausted and tired, the young man does not say a word. In order for the boy not to worry so much, the examiner decides to tell him his secret. A great martial artist once said that you should not be afraid of those who rely on their weapons, because they are just an ordinary tool, a sword, an axe, a bow and arrow, or maybe even ordinary magic. Each of the tools leaves a trace, and by studying the opponent's breathing, stance, movement, and attitude, you can easily understand how to dodge attacks. This is how a person becomes an invincible warrior. If you master this simple truth, then everything around you will become a weapon. Human strength will increase and surpass any class restrictions. And unknown anomalies in the Lotus Maze are now talking about the ideal moment for an interesting newcomer to appear. And in fact, the title of Porter, by the name of this one, is worthless. After all that he heard, the young man turns around and goes to his companions, who are ready to shower him with congratulations. They seem to be even more excited than the guy himself. Leaving the arena, Runemelia does not stop praising the guy, saying that he was incredible during the fight, that his strength was even higher than she thought, and congratulates Sei on passing the exam. In response, the guy snorts, muttering to himself that the old man seemed to be leading him by the nose all this time. He continues to think about the fight, his passing the exam and the words that the man said to him last. Scarlet does not miss the opportunity to boast, because she also passed, and not only the young man was praised, but also her. Runemelia is visibly upset because of her inexperience she failed, and the main character tries to cheer her up, because it seemed to him that the girl was only one small step away from victory. The guy continues to support the nun, saying that if she gains experience in the dungeons now, she will certainly be able to get a bronze rank, or even higher. The young man promises to always be on the side of Runemelia, to watch how she becomes a first-class adventurer, and advises her not to worry, but to focus on her skills. Embarrassed by such a fiery speech, the girl looks with eyes shining with admiration, whispering that, as expected, she herself is her personal apostle. The porter himself does not understand what the young maiden is talking about, and the girls behind her look at each other uncomprehendingly. At the entrance to the reception desk, Porter Sei and his companions are greeted by a beautiful girl, the guild registrar, whose hair falls over her face. Grinning, she looks around the guests, envious that the hero has his own harem at such a young age. The boy looks at old papers, turning them over in his hands. Various information is described there, but they don't seem that important. But at one point, the guy notices something that interests him more. He looks better, his eyes widen in surprise. Smiling softly, the guy says that there is really nothing special about him. He's just a porter, not an outstanding knight, and certainly not an angel or apostle descended from heaven. 200. But the nun ignores all this, giggling and smiling. Clasping her hands together, she says that she understood everything and will pretend that she did not notice anything. The girl is literally glowing with happiness, and this is already beginning to seem strange to the main character. To change the subject, the young man says that since both he and the young maiden are adventurers now, he has the right to call Runamelia simply by name, without adding the polite address, mistress. And then the nun is even more embarrassed, staring at the guy with her eyes. She waves her arms, gets confused in her own words, thanking her apostle, and then corrects this nickname to the name of Sei. The nun insists on continuing to call the porter Mr., and wants the guy to call her not just Runamelia, but a gentle, shortened Rune. Giggling contentedly, the young man promises that he will take care of the girl, now calling her the way she wanted it, Rune. This finally finishes off, in a good way, the nun. Finally, when the heroes reach the main foyer of the guild, they meet a lot of people who have surrounded them from all sides. The assassin is a little indignant. She does not like the fact that there are so many people around them and so much unnecessary attention, but apparently, Scarlet is very happy about this. She chuckles, starting to praise herself, because her heroic performance in the exam was simply stunning, and such a display of strength, despite her novice status, guarantees demand from different teams. Everyone will want to get such a valuable enchantress girl, but it seems that it's not just about Scarlet herself. People are interested in all the participants of the last test. A crowd of men runs up to Runamelia, looking not so much at her as at her breasts, allowing themselves to make comments about her large size. Sophie was also surrounded by men, eagerly examining the young body and saying, "What a cute little girl in front of them, with such beautiful pale skin." Each of those gathered here offers to join their team, because they can teach various useful things. The enchantress especially likes such increased attention to her person. Men mark her figure, saying that she is murderous, call her to them, lure them with a huge amount of potions that will allow them to have fun, and tell them that their team will cope with anything, even with the dungeon boss. Boss levels range from 26 to 31, and the Maze Master has 38. The young man thinks that these monsters are too strong for the bronze rank test. At the same moment, Sophie takes a step forward, saying that time is up, and it's time for the men from the squads who have gathered around, like a pack of hungry dogs or vultures, to move away and keep their distance. Each of the girls approaches Sei, hugs him, and Sophie, despite the joy of such looks directed at her, from such attention, still remains faithful. She says that each of the girls belongs to a porter, and if it suits the heads of the squads, then we can unite. Such speeches confuse not only those gathered around, but also the girls and the main character himself. But he does not miss the moment, does not get confused, and confirms what was said earlier. The young man is ready to unite only with those teams that promise not to touch his so-called wives. As expected, everyone makes way, the heads of the detachments go about their business, and the girls, and this one himself, sigh with displeasure, and only Runamelia embarrassedly stares at her, apostle, being surprised by what was said the most. Suddenly Scarlet grabs the guy by the throat, squeezing him so tightly that wreaths appear, and asks why the young man decided that she was his wife at all, or at least would be her. The porter immediately tries to calm the sorceress, saying that it was necessary to scare away the gathered louts. Sophie explains that they were attacked because both the girls and the newcomer himself, who just came to this foyer, pretended to be experienced in order to take over the bodies of each of the maidens. But in fact, all these men were not even going to defend the dungeon, much less defeat someone there. A voice from the shadows says that the remark is quite correct and comes out. A cute-looking guy with a short hairstyle comes closer to the guys, asking the guy if he is the head of the porter's team. And if so, why don't they team up? The main character does not hurry to answer, puts his hand on his side and notes that an unknown guy saw the leader in him immediately. Sei thought that the porter in this role would only make a bad impression, but the head of the unknown squad convinces him, saying that in fact it will only be to his advantage. In dungeon expeditions, as it turned out, it is important to have a porter with you, and the stranger who approached the heroes has been in the Adventurers Guild for 3 years. So during this time, he and his team have become quite experienced adventurers. After getting to know each other better, Sei introduces himself as the leader of the porter's team, and that guy turns out to be the leader of the investigation team named Rock. The guys shake hands as a sign of respect. The girl did not mention this detail earlier, but after hearing the conclusions of the young man, She folds her arms over her chest and squints at the boy, because he noticed the most important detail. The young man wonders if Rock intends to clean up the dungeon. Then for sure his team has already dealt with a couple of guards, and he replies with a smile that it is. The defeated guardians include a leopard newt, a mystical goat, a fan-shaped eagle, and a giant sand crab. Without even trying to be modest, Rock says that over the past 3 years, he and his team have defeated 4 dungeon guards, and now their new goal is a fire-breathing salamander. But there are minor difficulties, so for now their mission is considered suspended. For Runamelia, it seems incredible that the guys from the squad who came killed 4 guards, because these are incredibly strong monsters. Scarlet pouts her lips and asks what the situation is with the last guardian, and clarifies whether only the dungeon master will remain after him. Rock explains that the Lotus Maze is huge. Dungeon guards are constantly moving within their territory, and even with surveillance reports, finding them is considered a great success, and so you can unsuccessfully search for them for months. You can't rely on fortune alone, so intelligence and the right choice of weapons are of great importance. It is quite possible to defeat the guards, but in the process of dealing with them, Rock and his comrades lost a large number of team members, and now they are collecting detailed information about the dungeon and monsters in order to properly prepare, as well as avoid old mistakes and be ready for anything. In this case, according to Sei, shipping becomes even more important, and Rock praises that, because the guy grasps information pretty quickly, almost on the fly. As the guy explains, he and his team carefully plan everything and turn knowledge into combat power, thereby minimizing the time spent on useless reconnaissance. Rock and his comrades differ from other squads in that they focus mostly on training. The guy can't help but praise Sei. He is pleasantly surprised by the combat bravery of the porter shown in the already passed exam, and to find someone like a young man with a very large combat potential, which is absolutely not typical for cargo haulers, is something new and interesting. He blows his lips, saying that no one even looked at him for this very test, and the guy from the investigation squad admits that everyone was betting on the boy's loss, including himself. Although this upsets the porter, he can't help but thank him for his honesty. Distracting from the topic of losses and winnings, the young man says that he has caught the essence of the conversation, and since he and his companions are beginners, then joining with the old men is the best thing one can imagine and wish for. The Lotus Maze has a fairly high death rate, especially over the past couple of months. In addition to the bosses, other more powerful monsters appear in it, or large groups consisting of them. There were a lot of cases when people ran out of strength before they managed to achieve their goal. Smiling in response, Rock says that he appreciates what the boy said very much, and asks not to hesitate to ask any questions of interest to him or the rest of the team, because he and the squad will always be happy to help. This is how a new collaboration begins. Night falls outside after a hard day. Runamelia, Sei, Zophi, and Scarlet go to the house to replenish their strength and relax before the upcoming events. Zophi pulls her hair into a ponytail at night so that it doesn't get tangled, and turns to face Sei. She is standing in a light nightgown, almost transparent and translucent to her bare body. The girl asks the porter if it is really possible to trust new acquaintances. The guy, lying on a cot and bending his legs under his head, asks the assassin if she's talking about the Rock team. He believes that it certainly won't hurt to get together with more experienced guys, and on the contrary, it will allow you to gain something new. Plopping down on a small soft bed, the girl says that now, starting tomorrow, their lives will depend on that very investigation team, and therefore she asks the porter again if he's sure of his decision, because before that they had not teamed up with anyone. The guy notes that if you compare the Rock team with those guys from the Adventurers Guild who attacked like mad, then at least you can trust them. Simpletons, according to Sei, are easy to understand, and those who stand out are actually the scariest, because you don't know what's really on their minds. The young man says that the only thing that can protect is a tightly clenched weapon in his own hands. The darkness in people's hearts grows with the depth of the dungeon, where lawlessness reigns. And since tomorrow the guys go to their first dungeon, it's worth enjoying the process and getting a new experience. Remembering one important thing, just the same weapon. The young man hands the assassin block-throwing knives. Exactly 4 pieces. He remembered what she said, how her throwing weapon was taken away from her, leaving only a small dagger. Settling between the young man's legs, Zophi examines the new blades with admiration, saying that they are very high quality, made of black iron. Chuckling, he says that the weapon is the only one of its kind, made by a blacksmith magician, so we can assume that the girl is now the owner of unique daggers. Taking out a target and twirling it in his hands, the porter talks about the advantages of these blades. They are good in both melee and ranged combat, so from tomorrow, the assassin can use them. In any case, according to the registrar, great luck is needed for both the main character and his companions in order not to run out of strength before a clash with the bosses. Perhaps not only luck, but also skills, long training. It's hard to rely on fortune alone. After setting a target, the guy suggests that the girl try to practice throwing knives, and she happily agrees. Soaring up, closer to the ceiling, Zophie throws the knives one by one, aiming precisely at the bull's eye, because it cannot be otherwise. Only ideally, and in no other way. All the knives fall into the center of the target. From the force it flies off the bed, falls with a crash to the floor, and spins a little more. And even in such an unstable position, the girl manages to throw a few more daggers and hit. The training continues, but this time, you have to fight not with a fixed target in the form of a target, but with a seed. He deflects each blow with a frying pan lying nearby and wraps a strong rope around his fist. While the girl is distracted, he manages to throw her so that she wraps around Zophie's ankle and she collapsed with a crash on the bed. But she doesn't get upset about it at all. Looking up at the guy, she says how strong he is, and she did not expect anything else from him. The guy shakes his head and believes that he still has a long way to go in order to become someone to whom the assassin can entrust his rear in the future. The girl does not miss the opportunity to tease and mock, saying that in this case the porter is weak, and these words will come back to her. Pulling Zophie's shoulders closer to him, the young man places her between his legs and wraps his hands around her small breasts, starting to stroke, squeeze, and caress her, saying that in this case, the front part can be left on her. All the bickering is interrupted and replaced by the sweet moans of a young girl. In a fit of passion, the assassin, choking on quiet moans, manages to ask in a trembling voice how much the young man paid for her new weapon. He continues to play with her breasts. The girl's hair falls over her flushed face. Drops of sweat gather at her chin and flow down. In response, Sei chuckles, replying that the body of a young girl will be enough to pay and reimburse everything. Smiling playfully, Zophie calls the young man a pervert, and he doesn't even argue with her. There is an intimacy between the characters. In a room illuminated only by moonlight, and Zophie and Sei merge in a single burst of passion. There are stains from the lubricant on the bed, which the porter pours without regret. The union, the fusion of two bodies and souls, takes place all night. The guy does not spare the girl, takes what belongs to him, and the assassin does not mind at all. She leans back, stretches out her arms so that he grabs them and forcefully makes a strong push. If one of the teams was able to defeat the main monster, then it will not be reborn for about 10 more days. And in order to track activity, you need to follow the news on the bulletin board in the guild. This is what the registrar says, predicting in advance a possible question from the boy. At this time, in the darkness, illuminated by a flashlight with a candle inside, Rock is diligently writing something on paper with a pen, sitting on his desk. A grin lights up his face, and who knows what it portends in the future. The next morning, when the sun had already risen, the heroes went to the guild building. On the sides of the entrance there were Atlantean knights holding a sword in their hands. Columns and several peculiar pots with plants, flowers, and green bushes are visible on the facade of the building. No one knows what awaits them now, but they are not afraid to take this step into the unknown. The guy reviews all the documents again, realizing that over the past few months, no one will be able to defeat the bosses or the master of the maze. Either the adventurers did not return, or they gave up and did not go to the end, or they were afraid of what might happen to them. There is a reason why the maze master and the monsters have become so incredibly strong. Many adventurers were killed in the maze, which is why the monsters have increased their level. And as long as the deaths continue, the vicious circle will not end, the monsters will continue to become stronger. There may be several reasons for the mass death of adventurers. This is an unexpected mutation in the maze, and beginners challenging the maze without calculating their real strength, and the chaos caused by false information. The porter is distracted from his thoughts by the voice of the young receptionist. She suggests that the guy go to another city, because there you can increase your rank, even though it will take more time. But he refuses. He was interested in everything that had been said earlier. Ignoring this remark from the registrar, the guy asks to register Runamilia and Zafi as adventurers. Among the crowd behind him, the young man points with his thumb at two acquaintances who are carefully examining the guild building, mouths agape in surprise. Looking at the bulletin board, the young man continues to repeat his goal: to get the bronze rank as soon as possible, and a high level of difficulty will not be a problem for him. The girl does not answer anything to this, just smiles significantly, but does not try to convince the boy anymore. After reviewing all the materials received once again and finding nothing more for himself and the team, the boy prepares to leave and return to his girls. After a while, he finds himself back in the guild hall and looks down the stairs at people passing by. Someone is just waiting for his allies. Someone is in a hurry on business, and the young man notices girls standing nearby. Runamilia and Zofi flaunt their received wooden adventurer symbols located on their chests. They are made in the form of a pendant that can be worn around the neck. The nun looks at him admiringly, rejoicing at the received thing. The young man claps his hands slightly, congratulating his companions because with these symbols, these two are considered officially affiliated to the guild. At this moment, Scarlet is standing behind, but she is not as enthusiastic about joining the girls. Coming closer to the guys, the young sorceress listens as she talks about the need to register the team, since now everyone is gathered and considered new adventurers. All this causes genuine joy to the nun of the Holy Church. Scarlet asks if there are any ideas for the future name of the new team, and you can immediately see how the eyes of the youngest members of the squad light up. They clearly have a lot of ideas, and they are ready to tell everyone else about them, as if they had been waiting for this all their lives. The assassin is just beginning his thought about what the name should be, when suddenly the nun interrupts her. Her idea is to call the team Servants of God, but Zofi thinks it's stupid. Scarlet just stares reproachfully while the porter sighs, calling the girls typical beginners. Runamilia is interested in the opinion of the sorceress, how she would like to name the team, because Servants of God sounds strange in Zofi's opinion, and the assassin's version of girls is not suitable, because there is one guy in the squad. The girl rolls her eyes at this, replying that she doesn't care. The girls do not lag behind their older ally. They hug the sorceress, asking again about the name, and then Scarlet turns her gaze to the young man, asking the leader what name to choose. He gives out a simple and laconic name, Porter. In addition to registering, Sei has another goal, to get information for which he is willing to pay. The hero rings a coin that he took out of his pocket, showing the registrar that he has money, as well as a willingness to generously repay for help. To this, he receives a wave of indignation from the girls, because it sounds even worse than the previously proposed options. And while the enchantress is watching all this, the guy believes that everything can be solved by playing rock, paper, scissors. The winner will choose the name. It becomes known which name finally won when one of the formidable guards with rough features at the entrance to the arena reads from a wooden tablet the name of the newly minted adventurer team, Porter. Nevertheless, he won this kind of competition. When all the characters nod their heads, the man tells them that the first part of the exam takes place here in the arena. He asks to bring weapons and equipment with him, since the guild does not issue it, and then allows him to pass on. The incoming squad sees a circular arena in front of them. Guests are sitting in the stands, made in the form of steps, waiting for an incredible and exciting spectacle. The arena is decorated in the Etruscan architectural style. Marble columns stand out strongly against the background. The spectators gathered on the steps are watching the girls who enter the battlefield with piercing eyes, and someone does not pay attention to them at all, having fun with their companions. Scarlet notices all these people in the stands, asking the guard who they are and what they are doing here. The man calmly replies that these are spectators who have come to observe the process of passing the exam, since everyone present now has free time. Looking around, Sei notices that it looks like the audience gathered in the arena is betting on who can pass the test and who will fail. And, apparently, they have carefully studied the abilities of each of the adventurers. Nearby, the guy also notices a table around which people are crowding, leaving money on a special tray and discussing their favorites. Many of those present here have placed a bet, as evidenced by the gold coins on a special stand. The main character thinks to himself that he did not plan to start coming in with trumps, but since people here just want to stare, then there is probably nothing wrong with that. Shrugging his shoulders, the guy walks on, following the big bully. A loud exclamation from the guard breaks out of the boy's thoughts. He addresses the examiner, notifying that he has brought the adventurers being tested. The main character also needs to find out the location of herbs and monsters both in the city and in the maze. The girl notes that the arriving hero clearly has a thick wallet. Otherwise, he would not have offered a lot of money for such seemingly obvious information. A short, fat man was sitting on a bench nearby. He was humming softly and was already eating far from the first plate. There were several more clean saucers nearby. Putting his hands on his hips, he thinks that the examiner was the same big man who met at the entrance. But he turned out to be just an acting escort. When the old man turns to face the hero, the guy realizes that he was not looking at a short, mustachioed uncle, but a stronger man who could resist attacks. But perhaps the guy is very wrong in his judgments. The examiner takes the hilt of the sword hidden in his belt in his palm and introduces himself. He will test the newly arrived adventurers in the first practical test. As the man explains, you can do anything, any techniques, any magic. The most important thing is to demonstrate your skills and abilities. Coming closer, the old man challenges the heroes, saying that since they are confident in themselves, they can fight face to face with him, and he is already waiting for the first volunteer, beckoning to him. Determined, Rune steps forward. The girl squeezes her hands into small fists and says she is ready to be the first. There is that same twinkle in her eyes, and now, no matter how worried she is, all these doubts fade into the background. After examining the nun, the examiner clarifies whether the girl has the status of a saint, to which she answers in the affirmative, because now she is on a holy journey. Chuckling, the old man is a little surprised, because this is rarely heard these days, especially from young maidens. The questions do not stop. The man clarifies what level the girl has now, and whether she can use a skill called the Holy Arrow. Rune replies that she is now at the 20th level. And besides the Holy Arrow, she has the ability to use the energy of Holy Light, but she can only use it on herself. Watching all this, he thinks to himself that he does not understand a word. The examiner believes that the nun can easily cope with the task, but the only requirement is not to use holy energy. Trying to calm the noticeably hesitant girl, the old man allows her to try as much as she wants. Turning to Sei, the nun seeks support in the person of the porter. Finally, taking out her weapon from a secret pocket on her clothes, the girl wraps her bat with both hands and stands in a fighting stance, saying that she is ready to start taking her rank upgrade test. Chuckling, the registrar, not wanting to upset, says that all information about the district and the city can be found out for free. The knowledge about the labyrinth is in the archive, for just one small silver coin, but since this one cannot read, then you will have to pay twice. Shifting his gaze somewhere to the floor, the guy believes that his companion will be fine, because Rune has enough strength and determination to cope with such a task. Remembering recent events and how the girl used the attack in the battle with the giant centipede, he is more than confident in her, because then the saint was able to knock out the monster with one blow. However, as the young man recalls, at that very time, during the battle with the monster, the girl did not fully direct her magical power. At the same moment, the bat in the hands of the nun lights up with a bright light. Energy passes through the weapon. Lightning bolts gather around the girl. A strong wind rises, shaking everything around. The magic power radiates in her hands and passes through the weapon, giving it even more power. Sitting on a chair, the young man thinks that the full force of Runamelia's attack is definitely worth watching her sitting behind. But the guy is interested in the question of whether the old man will be alive after such a powerful attack, whether everything will be all right with him. The man's hair is fluttering in a raised squall of wind gust, but he has not moved from his place. Looks carefully, saying that it is amazing. It had been a long time since he had seen such a strong power of magical energy, and had not felt it. The old examiner is confident in his abilities. He grunts and defiantly invites the nun girl to come up and hit him if she can. This provokes Runamelia even more, and it comes. There is a loud scream and a blow. The entire arena around is filled with dust, fragments, particles of earth in the area where the action takes place. Neither the girl nor the examiner is visible behind this huge stream, and one can only hope that he is still alive. Runamelia grabs the handle of her bat, squeezing it tighter, and swings, looking directly at her opponent, the examiner. The girl spares no effort, prepares to strike with all her might. The old man looks calmly, Even fright is not visible on his face. The man is confident in himself. He is a professional in his field. Otherwise, he would not be an examiner in the guild. Perhaps the age is a little too old to actively fight, but the skills remain the same as in his youth. But the girl is ready to tell much more information to the porter, for example, what he will not be able to find in books and archives, but only for a certain cost. It is not profitable for her to help the boy just like that, especially considering that she can be scolded for this, and in the worst case, fired. Sei looks at the picture unfolding before his eyes. He's still worried not about the nun anymore, but about the little frail old man, whom one such blow will smear into a pancake. But surprisingly, the man with a completely unperturbed expression dodges the blow. He notices a bat flying at him and dodges. The girl misses her target. Swirls and gusts of wind rise around the examiner, raising particles of dust and earth behind them. But he stands unshakably in his place, holding one hand on his sword and the other behind his back, squeezing it into a weak fist. The girls standing nearby, and the porter, almost fly away from such a strong flow of air. Their eyes widened in surprise. They are unable to utter a word, being amazed by the picture they saw. None of them had imagined that a young nun could do such a thing. Closing his eyes, rather, and smiling with a noticeable mockery, the man says that what happened looks like a storm. Or rather, it would have been if the nun had hit. And since the blow missed the target, only a light breeze came out, in his humble opinion. Runamelia is only more offended by such taunts. She swings her weapon with a bat out of impotence, makes sounds of "coo" and "ha." But none of the chaotic blows passes the old man. He manages to easily step aside and dodge each of them. Carefully examining the examiner, the boy analyzes his actions and tactics of combat. The old man dodges every attack with small steps, and the movements of the young nun are too predictable for him, as if he sees through her. This is the key reason why the girl can't hit. With a shrill scream, more like a screech, Runamelia raises her arms above her head, holding her weapon tightly with the bat, and screams at the examiner, hoping that this blow will definitely pass him, and he will not be able to dodge. Another huge pillar of wind and dust blows away everything around, including the spectators in the stands. Stones and dust are flying at them, and loud cheers can be heard from those present at the exam venue. The assassin Sophie and the sorceress Scarlet look with horror and genuine surprise at how their friend deals with the examiner. None of them even suspected what power was hidden in the seemingly fragile little girl. The girl's hair and their clothes are disheveled due to a strong gust of wind, and they no longer look so beautiful. Sei becomes interested in what else he can learn from a stranger, and she explains that she has information about the weaknesses of bosses and masters of the labyrinth, and her offer is very generous, because the rest of the adventurers rely only on information from the archive. The spectators in the stands got no less, especially those who were sitting in the front rows. All of them are shouting a rhetorical but quite logical question. What kind of power is this? Some cover their eyes, face with their palms, and cry out in fright, because they have never seen anything like this before. Only this one, who has been sitting on a chair all this time and analyzing the fighting style, squints at the scattering dust, guessing that the examiner could dodge this blow as well. When everything around is dispersed, the silhouettes of both the old man and the nun become clearly visible. The clang of a sword being drawn from its scabbard is heard. The man manages to put a sharp blade to the neck of the girl, who is now in a vulnerable position. If the old man had the will, he would have killed Runamelia in an instant, with the same calm expression on his face. The examiner praises the girl, saying that this will be enough. The Runamelia does not move, being turned in the other direction. She looks at her bat, clutching it in her hands, and sees how it pierced the ground, leaving split stones and cracks behind. But not even a single hair fell from the man's head. Now surprise can be read not only on the girls' faces, but also on Sei's. It would seem that such a strong and powerful blow, but even it did not pass the examiner. Sophie and Scarlet's eyes widen even more. They stand with their mouths wide open, realizing that it widen even more. They stand with their mouths wide open, realizing that it will not be so easy for them to cope with the difficult test in the form of an exam. Panting, the nun lowers her head and tries to swing again. She doesn't want to give up so easily. Sweat drips from her forehead and cheeks. Severe shortness of breath appears, and the examiner asks if the girl can still move, because from her appearance, it seems that Runamelia is completely exhausted and will collapse very soon. Raising her hands, trembling with fatigue, the girl tries to swing again, but at the same moment the old man hits her lightly with his sword on the back of her head and neck, which causes the nun to ache. Clicking his tongue, the man raises his eyebrows, asking if Runamelia has at least some experience of real combat, and she replies in a tired, trembling voice that she fought using her holy magic only in a wandering maze. But this is only the second time she uses the weapon she is currently holding in her hands. Being shocked by what he heard, the porter realizes that the girl's fight with the centipede was her first serious battle in her entire life. At that time, it did not seem so, because there was a certain professionalism in the girl. There was not a drop of fear. Putting the sword back on his belt, the man is ready to announce his verdict. The nun has enough abilities and skills, but it is difficult to assess her due to lack of experience in real combat, and even despite the strength demonstrated earlier in front of the examiner. This time, the girl does not pass. The boy asks again, who else is the master of the labyrinth? But the registrar realizes at this moment that the porter seems to know nothing. Therefore, she suggests to start by registering those two adventurers who came with Sei, and then go to a secret place where she will explain everything. The old man reports that Runamelia failed the test. At least this time, she could not cope with the task. She'll have to do it again, but only when she gets enough experience in dungeons and small battles. Clenching her teeth, Scarlet clenches her palms into tight fists, calling the examiner not the most flattering words, and restrains herself from hitting him. The assassin at this time only looks reproachfully, without uttering a word. It only evaluates the full scale of the efforts that will have to be done to pass the test. Brushing the specks of dust from his clothes, the examiner turns to the nun again, offering to come to her again when she has gained enough experience in the maze and is 100% confident in her abilities. Runamelia has no choice but to sigh heavily and agree to what was said earlier. For himself, he concludes that abilities will mean nothing if a person is not able to show himself in a real fight. Getting up from the chair and leaning on its back with one hand, the young man praises Runamelia, saying that she did a great job and fought well. But instead of accepting thanks, the nun sobs and believes that she looked very pathetic in front of everyone present, and especially in front of herself. But he joyfully replies that he does not consider the girl to be such at all, because she was amazing, so it's worth trying again. But before that, work harder. While the girl is resting, sitting on a chair from which the porter recently got up, Sei looks with a share of pride in her eyes, thinking that despite her lack of experience, the nun has just great strength, and she will definitely be able to become a formidable ally in the future. After the maze, she will grow up quickly, become more experienced and stronger. Meanwhile, the break for the repair work of the examination site begins, because after the battle there were almost no stone slabs left. Beavers and hardhats enter the arena, carrying a stone block one by one under the guidance of the most senior builder. When all the construction work has been completed, Zilphi, a young assassin, enters the arena, proudly announcing that it is now her turn to fight. The examiner stands in the center of the site, asking to show what a brave young girl who came forward is capable of. Without saying anything else, Zilphi looks directly at the old man and gradually disappears into thin air. The examiner raises his eyebrows in surprise, but does not take any action yet, watching what will happen next. The silhouette of the assassin becomes barely distinguishable, and then completely disappears from the field of view of both the audience and the old man who stands with his palm clenched behind his back into a fist. He clicks his tongue, giving out only a quiet, well, well.